God looks into the heart. God addressed Samuel. So how long are you going to mope over Saul? You know I've rejected him as king over Israel. Fill your flask with anointing oil and get going. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've spotted the very king I want among his sons. I can't do that, said Samuel. Saul will hear about it and kill me. God said, take a heifer with you and announce, I've come to lead you in worship of God, with this heifer as a sacrifice. Make sure Jesse gets invited. I'll let you know what to do next. I'll point out the one you are to anoint. Samuel did what God told him. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the town fathers greeted him, but apprehensively. Is there something wrong? Nothing's wrong. I've come to sacrifice this heifer and lead you in the worship of God. Prepare yourselves, be consecrated, and join me in worship. He made sure Jesse and his sons were also consecrated and called to worship. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, here he is, God's anointed. But God told Samuel, looks aren't everything. Don't be impressed with his looks and stature. I've already eliminated him. God judges persons differently than humans do. Men and women look at the face. God looks into the heart. Jesse then called up Abinadab and presented him to Samuel. Samuel said, this man isn't God's choice either. Next, Jesse presented Shammah. Samuel said, no, this man isn't either. Jesse presented his 7 sons to Samuel. Samuel was blunt with Jesse. God hasn't chosen any of these. Then he asked Jesse, is this it? Are there no more sons? Well, yes, there's the runt, but he's out tending the sheep. Samuel ordered Jesse, go get him. We're not moving from this spot until he's here. Jesse sent for him. He was brought in, the very picture of health, bright-eyed, good-looking. God said, up on your feet, anoint him. This is the one. Samuel took his flask of oil and anointed him, with his brothers standing around watching. The Spirit of God entered David like a rush of wind, God vitally empowering him for the rest of his life. Samuel left and went home to Ramah. David, an excellent musician. At that very moment, the Spirit of God left Saul, and in its place, a black mood sent by God settled on him. He was terrified. Saul's advisors said, this awful tormenting depression from God is making your life miserable. Oh, Master, let us help. Let us look for someone who can play the harp. When the black mood from God moves in, he'll play his music, and you'll feel better. Saul told his servants, go ahead, find me someone who can play well, and bring him to me. One of the young men spoke up. I know someone. I've seen him myself, the son of Jesse of Bethlehem, an excellent musician. He's also courageous, of age, well-spoken, and good-looking, and God is with him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse, requesting, send your son David to me, the one who tends the sheep. Jesse took a donkey, loaded it with a couple of loaves of bread, a flask of wine, and a young goat, and sent his son David with it to Saul. David came to Saul and stood before him. Saul liked him immediately and made him his right-hand man. Saul sent word back to Jesse, thank you. David will stay here. He's just the one I was looking for. I'm very impressed by him. After that, whenever the bad depression from God tormented Saul, David got out his harp and played. That would calm Saul down, and he would feel better as the moodiness lifted. Chapter 17. Goliath. The Philistines drew up their troops for battle. They deployed them to Succah in Judah and set up camp between Succah and Azekah at Ephes-Dammim. Saul and the Israelites came together, camped at Oak Valley, and spread out their troops in battle readiness for the Philistines. The Philistines were on one hill, the Israelites on the opposing hill, with the valley between them. A giant, nearly 10 feet tall, stepped out from the Philistine line into the open. Goliath from Gath. He had a bronze helmet on his head and was dressed in armor, 126 pounds of it. He wore bronze shin guards and carried a bronze sword. His spear was like a fence rail. The spear tip alone weighed over 15 pounds. His shield-bearer walked ahead of him. Goliath stood there and called out to the Israelite troops, "Why bother using your whole army? Am I not Philistine enough for you? And you're all committed to Saul, aren't you? So pick your best fighter and pit him against me. If he gets the upper hand and kills me, the Philistines will all become your slaves. But if I get the upper hand and kill him, you'll all become our slaves and serve us. I challenge the troops of Israel this day. Give me a man. Let us fight it out together." When Saul and his troops heard the Philistines' challenge, they were terrified and lost all hope. Enter David. He was the son of Jesse, the Ephrathite from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse, the father of 8 sons, was himself too old to join Saul's army. Jesse's 3 older sons had followed Saul to war. The names of the 3 sons who had joined up with Saul were Eliab, the firstborn, next Abinadab, and third Shammah. David was the youngest son. While his 3 oldest brothers went to war with Saul, David went back and forth from attending to Saul to tending his father's sheep in Bethlehem. Each morning and evening for 40 days, Goliath took his stand and made his speech. One day, Jesse told David his son, "Take this sack of cracked wheat and these 10 loaves of bread and run them down to your brothers in the camp. And take these 10 wedges of cheese to the captain of their division. Check in on your brothers to see whether they are getting along all right, and let me know how they are doing. Saul and your brothers and all the Israelites in their war with the Philistines in the Oak Valley." David was up at the crack of dawn, and, having arranged for someone to tend his flock, took the food and was on his way just as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the army was moving into battle formation, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines moved into position, facing each other, battle ready. David left his bundles of food in the care of a sentry, ran to the troops who were deployed, and greeted his brothers. While they were talking together, the Philistine champion, Goliath of Gath, stepped out from the front lines of the Philistines and gave his usual challenge. David heard him. The Israelites, to a man, fell back the moment they saw the giant, totally frightened. The talk among the troops was, "Have you ever seen anything like this? This man openly and defiantly challenging Israel? The man who kills the giant will have it made. The king will give him a huge reward, offer his daughter as a bride, and give his entire family a free ride." 5 smooth stones. David, who was talking to the men standing around him, asked, "What's in it for the man who kills that Philistine and gets rid of this ugly blot on Israel's honor? Who does he think he is anyway? This uncircumcised Philistine, taunting the armies of God alive." They told him what everyone was saying about what the king would do for the man who killed the Philistine. Eliab, his older brother, heard David fraternizing with the men and lost his temper. "What are you doing here? Why aren't you minding your own business, tending that scrawny flock of sheep? I know what you're up to. You've come down here to see the sights, hoping for a ringside seat at a bloody battle." "What is it with you?" replied David. "All I did was ask a question." Ignoring his brother, he turned to someone else, asked the same question, and got the same answer as before. The things David was saying were picked up and reported to Saul. Saul sent for him. "Master," said David, "don't give up hope. I'm ready to go and fight this Philistine." Saul answered David, "You can't go and fight this Philistine. You're too young and inexperienced, and he's been at this fighting business since before you were born." David said, "I've been a shepherd, tending sheep for my father. Whenever a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I'd go after it, knock it down, and rescue the lamb. If it turned on me, I'd grab it by the throat, wring its neck, and kill it. Lion or bear, it made no difference. I killed it. And I'll do the same to this Philistine pig who is taunting the troops of God alive. God, who delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear, will deliver me from this Philistine." Saul said, "Go, and God help you." Then Saul outfitted David as a soldier in armor. He put his bronze helmet on his head and belted his sword on him over the armor. David tried to walk, but he could hardly budge. David told Saul, "I can't even move with all this stuff on me. I'm not used to this." And he took it all off. Then David took his shepherd's staff, selected 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in the pocket of his shepherd's pack, and with his sling in his hand, approached Goliath. As the Philistine paced back and forth, his shield-bearer in front of him, he noticed David. He took one look down on him and sneered, a mere youngster, apple-cheeked and peach-fuzzed. The Philistine ridiculed David. "Am I a dog that you come after me with a stick?" and he cursed him by his gods. "Come on," said the Philistine, "I'll make roadkill of you for the buzzards. I'll turn you into a tasty morsel for the field mice." David answered, "You come at me with sword and spear and battle axe. I come at you in the name of God of the angel armies, the God of Israel's troops, whom you curse and mock. This very day, God is handing you over to me. I'm about to kill you, cut off your head, and serve up your body and the bodies of your Philistine buddies to the crows and coyotes. The whole earth will know that there's an extraordinary God in Israel, and everyone gathered here will learn that God doesn't save by means of sword or spear. The battle belongs to God. He's handing you to us on a platter." That roused the Philistine, and he started toward David. David took off from the front line, running toward the Philistine. David reached into his pocket for a stone, slung it, and hit the Philistine hard in the forehead, embedding the stone deeply. The Philistine crashed, face down in the dirt. That's how David beat the Philistine, with a sling and a stone. He hit him and killed him. No sword for David. Then David ran up to the Philistine and stood over him, pulled the giant's sword from its sheath, and finished the job by cutting off his head. When the Philistines saw that their great champion was dead, they scattered, running for their lives. The men of Israel and Judah were up on their feet, shouting. They chased the Philistines all the way to the outskirts of Gath and the gates of Ekron. Wounded Philistines were strewn along the Shaaraim road all the way to Gath and Ekron. After chasing the Philistines, the Israelites came back and looted their camp. David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but the giant's weapons he placed in his own tent. When Saul saw David go out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Tell me about this young man's family." Abner said, "For the life of me, O king, I don't know." The king said, "Well, find out the lineage of this raw youth." As soon as David came back from killing the Philistine, Abner brought him, the Philistine's head still in his hand, straight to Saul. Saul asked him, "Young man, whose son are you?" "I'm the son of your servant Jesse," said David, "the one who lives in Bethlehem." Chapter 18. Jonathan and David, soul friends. By the time David had finished reporting to Saul, Jonathan was deeply impressed with David. An immediate bond was forged between them. He became totally committed to David. From that point on, he would be David's number one advocate and friend. Saul received David into his own household that day, no more to return to the home of his father. Jonathan, out of his deep love for David, made a covenant with him. He formalized it with solemn gifts, his own royal robe and weapons, armor, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul gave David to do, he did it, and did it well. So well that Saul put him in charge of his military operations. Everybody, both the people in general and Saul's servants, approved of and admired David's leadership. David, the name on everyone's lips. As they returned home, after David had killed the Philistine, the women poured out of all the villages of Israel, singing and dancing, welcoming King Saul with tambourines, festive songs, and lutes. In playful frolic, the women sang, "Saul kills by the 1,000, David by the 10,000. This made Saul angry, very angry. He took it as a personal insult. He said, "They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Before you know it, they'll be giving him the kingdom." From that moment on, Saul kept his eye on David. The next day, an ugly mood was sent by God to afflict Saul, who became quite beside himself, raving. David played his harp as he usually did at such times. Saul had a spear in his hand. Suddenly, Saul threw the spear, thinking, "I'll nail David to the wall." David ducked, and the spear missed. This happened twice. Now Saul feared David. It was clear that God was with David and had left Saul. So Saul got David out of his sight by making him an officer in the army. David was in combat frequently. Everything David did turned out well. Yes, God was with him. As Saul saw David becoming more successful, he himself grew more fearful. He could see the handwriting on the wall. But everyone else in Israel and Judah loved David. They loved watching him in action. One day, Saul said to David, "Here is Merab, my eldest daughter. I want to give her to you as your wife. Be brave and bold for my sake. Fight God's battles." But all the time Saul was thinking, "The Philistines will kill him for me. I won't have to lift a hand against him." David, embarrassed, answered, "Do you really mean that? I'm from a family of nobodies. I can't be son-in-law to the king." The wedding day was set, but as the time neared for Merab and David to be married, Saul reneged and married his daughter off to Adriel, the Meholathite. Meanwhile, Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David. When Saul was told of this, he rubbed his hands in anticipation. "Ah, a second chance. I'll use Michal as bait to get David out where the Philistines will make short work of him." So again he said to David, "You're going to be my son-in-law." Saul ordered his servants, "Get David off by himself and tell him, 'The king is very taken with you, and everyone at court loves you. Go ahead, become the king's son-in-law.'" The king's servants told all this to David, but David held back. "What are you thinking of? I can't do that. I'm a nobody. I have nothing to offer." When the servants reported David's response to Saul, he told them to tell David this: "The king isn't expecting any money from you, only this. Go kill 100 Philistines and bring evidence of your vengeance on the king's behalf. Avenge the king on his enemies." Saul expected David to be killed in action. On receiving this message, David was pleased. There was something he could do for the king that would qualify him to be his son-in-law. He lost no time but went right out, he and his men, killed the 100 Philistines, brought their evidence back in a sack, and counted it out before the king. Mission completed. Saul gave Michal, his daughter, to David in marriage. As Saul more and more realized that God was with David and how much his own daughter, Michal, loved him, his fear of David increased and settled into hate. Saul hated David. Whenever the Philistine warlords came out to battle, David was there to meet them and beat them, upstaging Saul's men. David's name was on everyone's lips. Chapter 19. The Black Mood of Saul. Saul called his son Jonathan together with his servants and ordered them to kill David. But because Jonathan treasured David, he went and warned him, "My father is looking for a way to kill you. Here's what you are to do. Tomorrow morning, hide and stay hidden. I'll go out with my father into the field where you are hiding. I'll talk about you with my father, and we'll see what he says. Then I'll report back to you." Jonathan brought up David with his father, speaking well of him. "Please," he said to his father, "don't attack David. He hasn't wronged you, has he? And just look at all the good he has done. He put his life on the line when he killed the Philistine. What a great victory God gave Israel that day. You were there, you saw it, and were on your feet applauding with everyone else. So why would you even think of sinning against an innocent person, killing David for no reason whatever?" Saul listened to Jonathan and said, "You're right. As God lives, David lives. He will not be killed." Jonathan sent for David and reported to him everything that was said. Then he brought David back to Saul, and everything was as it was before. War broke out again, and David went out to fight Philistines. He beat them badly, and they ran for their lives. But then a black mood from God settled over Saul and took control of him. He was sitting at home, his spear in hand, while David was playing music. Suddenly, Saul tried to skewer David with his spear, but David ducked. The spear stuck in the wall, and David got away. It was night. Saul sent men to David's house to stake it out, and then, first thing in the morning, to kill him. But Michal, David's wife, told him what was going on. "Quickly now, make your escape tonight. If not, you'll be dead by morning." She let him out of a window, and he made his escape. Then Michal took a dummy god and put it in the bed, placed a wig of goat's hair on its head, and threw a quilt over it. When Saul's men arrived to get David, she said, "He's sick in bed." Saul sent his men back, ordering them, "Bring him, bed and all, so I can kill him." When the men entered the room, all they found in the bed was the dummy god with its goat hair wig. Saul stormed at Michal. "How could you play tricks on me like this? You sided with my enemy, and now he's gotten away." Michal said, "He threatened me. He said, 'Help me out of here or I'll kill you.'" David made good his escape and went to Samuel at Ramah and told him everything Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel withdrew to the privacy of Naioth. Saul was told, "David's at Naioth in Ramah." He immediately sent his men to capture him. They saw a band of prophets prophesying with Samuel presiding over them. Before they knew it, the Spirit of God was on them too, and they were ranting and raving right along with the prophets. That was reported back to Saul, and he dispatched more men. They, too, were soon prophesying. So Saul tried a third time, a third set of men, and they ended up mindlessly raving as well. Fed up, Saul went to Ramah himself. He came to the big cistern at Seku and inquired, "Where are Samuel and David?" A bystander said, "Over at Naioth in Ramah." As he headed out for Naioth in Ramah, the Spirit of God was on him too. All the way to Naioth, he was caught up in a babbling trance. He ripped off his clothes and lay there rambling gibberish before Samuel for a day and a night, stretched out naked. People are still talking about it. Saul among the prophets, who would have guessed? Chapter 20. A covenant friendship in God's name. David got out of Naioth in Ramah alive and went to Jonathan. "What do I do now? What wrong have I inflicted on your father that makes him so determined to kill me?" "Nothing," said Jonathan. "You've done nothing wrong, and you're not going to die. Really, you're not. My father tells me everything. He does nothing, whether big or little, without confiding in me. So why would he do this behind my back? It can't be." But David said, "Your father knows that we are the best of friends. So he says to himself, 'Jonathan must know nothing of this. If he does, he'll side with David.' But it's true. As sure as God lives, and as sure as you're alive before me right now, he's determined to kill me." Jonathan said, "Tell me what you have in mind. I'll do anything for you." David said, "Tomorrow marks the new moon. I'm scheduled to eat dinner with the king. Instead, I'll go hide in the field until the evening of the 3rd. If your father misses me, say, 'David asked if he could run down to Bethlehem, his hometown, for an anniversary reunion and worship with his family.' If he says, 'Good,' then I'm safe. But if he gets angry, you'll know for sure that he's made up his mind to kill me. Oh, stick with me in this. You've entered into a covenant of God with me. Remember, if I'm in the wrong, go ahead and kill me yourself. Why bother giving me up to your father?" "Never," exclaimed Jonathan. "I'd never do that. If I get the slightest hint that my father is fixated on killing you, I'll tell you." David asked, "And whom will you get to tell me if your father comes back with a harsh answer?" "Come outside," said Jonathan. "Let's go to the field." When the two of them were out in the field, Jonathan said, "As God, the God of Israel, is my witness, by this time tomorrow I'll get it out of my father how he feels about you. Then I'll let you know what I learn. May God do his worst to me if I let you down. If my father still intends to kill you, I'll tell you and get you out of here in one piece. And God be with you as he's been with my father. If I make it through this alive, continue to be my covenant friend. And if I die, keep the covenant friendship with my family forever. And when God finally rids the earth of David's enemies, stay loyal to Jonathan." Jonathan repeated his pledge of love and friendship for David. He loved David more than his own soul. Jonathan then laid out his plan. "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you'll be missed when you don't show up for dinner. On the 3rd day, when they've quit expecting you, come to the place where you hid before and wait beside that big boulder. I'll shoot 3 arrows in the direction of the boulder. Then I'll send off my servant. Go find the arrows. If I yell after the servant, 'The arrows are on this side, retrieve them,' that's the signal that you can return safely. As God lives, not a thing to fear. But if I yell, 'The arrows are farther out,' then run for it. God wants you out of here. Regarding all the things we've discussed, remember that God's in on this, with us to the very end." David hid in the field. On the holiday of the new moon, the king came to the table to eat. He sat where he always sat, the place against the wall, with Jonathan across the table and Abner at Saul's side. But David's seat was empty. Saul didn't mention it at the time, thinking, "Something's happened that's made him unclean. That's it, he's probably unclean for the holy meal." But the day after the new moon, day 2 of the holiday, David's seat was still empty. Saul asked Jonathan, his son, "So where's that son of Jesse? He hasn't eaten with us either yesterday or today." Jonathan said, David asked my special permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, "Give me leave to attend a family reunion back home. My brothers have ordered me to be there. If it seems all right to you, let me go and see my brothers. That's why he's not here at the king's table." Saul exploded in anger at Jonathan. "You son of a slut, don't you think I know that you're in cahoots with the son of Jesse, disgracing both you and your mother? For as long as the son of Jesse is walking around free on this earth, your future in this kingdom is at risk. Now, go get him. Bring him here. From this moment, he's as good as dead." Jonathan stood up to his father. "Why dead? What's he done?" Saul threw his spear at him to kill him. That convinced Jonathan that his father was fixated on killing David. Jonathan stormed from the table, furiously angry, and ate nothing the rest of the day, upset for David, and smarting under the humiliation from his father. In the morning, Jonathan went to the field for the appointment with David. He had his young servant with him. He told the servant, "Run and get the arrows I'm about to shoot." The boy started running, and Jonathan shot an arrow way beyond him. As the boy came to the area where the arrow had been shot, Jonathan yelled out, "Isn't the arrow farther out?" He yelled again, "Hurry, quickly, don't just stand there." Jonathan's servant then picked up the arrow and brought it to his master. The boy, of course, knew nothing of what was going on. Only Jonathan and David knew. Jonathan gave his quiver and bow to the boy and sent him back to town. After the servant was gone, David got up from his hiding place beside the boulder, then fell on his face to the ground, 3 times prostrating himself. And then they kissed one another and wept, friend over friend, David weeping especially hard. Jonathan said, "Go in peace. The 2 of us have vowed friendship in God's name, saying, 'God will be the bond between me and you, and between my children and your children forever.'" Chapter 21. David pretends to go crazy. David went on his way, and Jonathan returned to town. David went to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech was alarmed as he went out to greet David. "What are you doing here all by yourself, and not a soul with you?" David answered Ahimelech the priest, "The king sent me on a mission and gave strict orders. This is top secret, not a word of this to a soul. I've arranged to meet up with my men in a certain place. Now, what's there here to eat? Do you have 5 loaves of bread? Give me whatever you can scrounge up." "I don't have any regular bread on hand," said the priest. "I only have holy bread. If your men have not slept with women recently, it's yours." David said, "None of us has touched a woman. I always do it this way when I'm on a mission. My men abstain from sex. Even when it is an ordinary mission, we do that. How much more on this holy mission?" So the priest gave them the holy bread. It was the only bread he had, bread of the presence that had been removed from God's presence and replaced by fresh bread at the same time. One of Saul's officials was present that day, keeping a religious vow. His name was Doeg the Edomite. He was chief of Saul's shepherds. David asked Ahimelech, "Do you have a spear or sword of any kind around here? I didn't have a chance to grab my weapons. The king's mission was urgent, and I left in a hurry." The priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine you killed at Oak Valley. That's here. It's behind the ephod, wrapped in a cloth. If you want it, take it. There's nothing else here." "Oh," said David, "there's no sword like that. Give it to me." And at that, David shot out of there, running for his life from Saul. He went to Achish, king of Gath. When the servants of Achish saw him, they said, "Can this be David, the famous David? Is this the one they sing of at their dances? Saul kills by the 1,000, David by the 10,000. When David realized that he had been recognized, he panicked, fearing the worst from Achish, king of Gath. So right there, while they were looking at him, he pretended to go crazy, pounding his head on the city gate and foaming at the mouth, spit dripping from his beard. Achish took one look at him and said to his servants, "Can't you see he's crazy? Why did you let him in here? Don't you think I have enough crazy people to put up with as it is without adding another? Get him out of here." Chapter 22. Saul murders the priests of God. So David got away and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and others associated with his family heard where he was, they came down and joined him. Not only that, but all who were down on their luck came around. Losers and vagrants and misfits of all sorts. David became their leader. There were about 400 in all. Then David went to Mizpah in Moab. He petitioned the king of Moab, "Grant asylum to my father and mother until I find out what God has planned for me." David left his parents in the care of the king of Moab. They stayed there all through the time David was hiding out. The prophet Gad told David, "Don't go back to the cave. Go to Judah." David did what he told him. He went to the forest of Hereth. Saul got word of the whereabouts of David and his men. He was sitting under the big oak on the hill at Gibeah at the time, spear in hand, holding court surrounded by his officials. He said, "Listen here, you Benjaminites. Don't think for a minute that you have any future with the son of Jesse. Do you think he's going to hand over choice land, give you all influential jobs? Think again. Here you are, conspiring against me, whispering behind my back. Not one of you is man enough to tell me that my own son is making deals with the son of Jesse. Not one of you who cares enough to tell me that my son has taken the side of this outlaw." Then Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, spoke up. "I saw the son of Jesse meet with Ahimelech, son of Ahitub in Nob. I saw Ahimelech pray with him for God's guidance, give him food, and arm him with the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Saul sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, along with the whole family of priests at Nob. They all came to the king. Saul said, "You listen to me, son of Ahitub." "Certainly, master," he said. "Why have you ganged up against me with the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword, even praying with him for God's guidance, setting him up as an outlaw, out to get me?" Ahimelech answered the king, "There's not an official in your administration as true to you as David, your own son-in-law and captain of your bodyguard. None more honorable either. Do you think that was the first time I prayed with him for God's guidance? Hardly. But don't accuse me of any wrongdoing, me or my family. I have no idea what you're trying to get at with this outlaw talk." The king said, "Death, Ahimelech, you're going to die, you and everyone in your family." The king ordered his henchmen, "Surround and kill the priests of God. They're hand in glove with David. They knew he was running away from me and didn't tell me." But the king's men wouldn't do it. They refused to lay a hand on the priests of God. Then the king told Doeg, "You do it. Massacre the priests." Doeg the Edomite led the attack and slaughtered the priests, the 85 men who wore the sacred robes. He then carried the massacre into Nob, the city of priests, killing man and woman, child and baby, ox, donkey, and sheep, the works. Only one son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, escaped, Abiathar. He got away and joined up with David. Abiathar reported to David that Saul had murdered the priests of God. David said to Abiathar, "I knew it. That day I saw Doeg the Edomite there. I knew he'd tell Saul. I'm to blame for the death of everyone in your father's family. Stay here with me. Don't be afraid. The one out to kill you is out to kill me too. Stick with me. I'll protect you." Chapter 23. Living in Desert Hideouts. It was reported to David that the Philistines were raiding Keilah and looting the grain. David went in prayer to God. "Should I go after these Philistines and teach them a lesson?" God said, "Go, attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men said, "We live in fear of our lives right here in Judah. How can you think of going to Keilah in the thick of the Philistines?" So David went back to God in prayer. God said, "Get going, head for Keilah. I'm placing the Philistines in your hands." David and his men went to Keilah and fought the Philistines. He scattered their cattle, beat them decisively, and saved the people of Keilah. After Abiathar took refuge with David, he joined David in the raid on Keilah, bringing the ephod with him. Saul learned that David had gone to Keilah and thought immediately, "Good, God has handed him to me on a platter. He's in a walled city with locked gates, trapped." Saul mustered his troops for battle and set out for Keilah to lay siege to David and his men. But David got wind of Saul's strategy to destroy him and said to Abiathar the priest, "Get the ephod." Then David prayed to God, "God of Israel, I've just heard that Saul plans to come to Keilah and destroy the city because of me. Will the city fathers of Keilah turn me over to him? Will Saul come down and do what I've heard? Oh God, God of Israel, tell me." God replied, "He's coming down." And will the headmen of Keilah turn me and my men over to Saul? And God said, they'll turn you over. So David and his men got out of there. There were about 600 of them. They left Keilah and kept moving, going here, there, wherever, always on the move. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he called off the raid. David continued to live in desert hideouts and the backcountry wilderness hills of Ziph. Saul was out looking for him day after day, but God never turned David over to him. David kept out of the way in the wilderness of Ziph, secluded at Horesh, since it was plain that Saul was determined to hunt him down. Jonathan, Saul's son, visited David at Horesh and encouraged him in God. He said, "Don't despair. My father, Saul, can't lay a hand on you. You will be Israel's king, and I'll be right at your side to help, and my father knows it." Then the two of them made a covenant before God. David stayed at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. Some Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Did you know that David is hiding out near us in the caves and canyons of Horesh? Right now, he's at Hakilah Hill, just south of Jeshimon. So whenever you're ready to come down, we'd count it an honor to hand him over to the king." Saul said, "God bless you for thinking about me. Now, go back and check everything out. Learn his routines, observe his movements, where he goes, who he's with. He's very shrewd, you know. Scout out all his hiding places. Then meet me at Nacon, and I'll go with you. If he is anywhere to be found in all the thousands of Judah, I'll track him down." So the Ziphites set out on their reconnaissance for Saul. Meanwhile, David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the desert south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men arrived and began their search. When David heard of it, he went south to Rock Mountain, camping out in the wilderness of Maon. Saul heard where he was and set off for the wilderness of Maon in pursuit. Saul was on one side of the mountain, David and his men on the other. David was in full retreat, running, with Saul and his men closing in, about to get him. Just then, a messenger came to Saul and said, "Hurry, come back. The Philistines have just attacked the country." So Saul called off his pursuit of David and went back to deal with the Philistines. That's how that place got the name Narrow Escape. David left there and camped out in the caves and canyons of En-Gedi. Chapter 24. I'm no rebel. When Saul came back after dealing with the Philistines, he was told, "David is now in the wilderness of En-Gedi." Saul took 3 companies, the best he could find in all Israel, and set out in search of David and his men in the region of Wild Goat Rocks. He came to some sheep pens along the road. There was a cave there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were huddled far back in the same cave. David's men whispered to him, "Can you believe it? This is the day God was talking about when he said, 'I'll put your enemy in your hands. You can do whatever you want with him.'" Quiet as a cat, David crept up and cut off a piece of Saul's royal robe. Immediately, he felt guilty. He said to his men, "God forbid that I should have done this to my master, God's anointed, that I should so much as raise a finger against him. He's God's anointed." David held his men in check with these words and wouldn't let them pounce on Saul. Saul got up, left the cave, and went on down the road. Then David stood at the mouth of the cave and called to Saul, "My master, my king." Saul looked back. David fell to his knees and bowed in reverence. He called out, "Why do you listen to those who say David is out to get you? This very day with your very own eyes you have seen that just now in the cave God put you in my hands. My men wanted me to kill you, but I wouldn't do it. I told them that I won't lift a finger against my master. He's God's anointed. Oh, my father, look at this. Look at this piece that I cut from your robe. I could have cut you, killed you, but I didn't. Look at the evidence. I'm not against you. I'm no rebel. I haven't sinned against you, and yet you're hunting me down to kill me. Let's decide which of us is in the right. God may avenge me, but it is in his hands, not mine. An old proverb says, 'Evil deeds come from evil people.' So be assured that my hand won't touch you. What does the king of Israel think he's doing? Who do you think you're chasing? A dead dog? A flea? God is our judge. He'll decide who is right. Oh, that he would look down right now, decide right now, and set me free of you." When David had finished saying all this, Saul said, Can this be the voice of my son David? And he wept in loud sobs. You're the one in the right, not me, he continued. You've heaped good on me. I've dumped evil on you. And now you've done it again, treated me generously. God put me in your hands and you didn't kill me. Why? When a man meets his enemy, does he send him down the road with a blessing? May God give you a bonus of blessings for what you've done for me today. I know now beyond doubt that you will rule as king. The kingdom of Israel is already in your grasp. Now promise me under God that you will not kill off my family or wipe my name off the books. David promised Saul. Then Saul went home, and David and his men went up to their wilderness refuge. Chapter 25. To fight God's battles. Samuel died. The whole country came to his funeral. Everyone grieved over his death, and he was buried in his hometown of Ramah. Meanwhile, David moved again, this time to the wilderness of Maon. There was a certain man in Maon who carried on his business in the region of Carmel. He was very prosperous, 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and it was sheep shearing time in Carmel. The man's name was Nabal, fool, a Calebite, and his wife's name was Abigail. The woman was intelligent and good-looking, the man brutish and mean. David, out in the back country, heard that Nabal was shearing his sheep and sent 10 of his young men off with these instructions. Go to Carmel and approach Nabal. Greet him in my name. Peace, life, and peace to you. Peace to your household. Peace to everyone here. I heard that it's sheep shearing time. Here's the point. When your shepherds were camped near us, we didn't take advantage of them. They didn't lose a thing all the time they were with us in Carmel. Ask your young men, they'll tell you. What I'm asking is that you be generous with my men. Share the feast. Give whatever your heart tells you to your servants and to me, David, your son. David's young men went and delivered his message word for word to Nabal. Nabal tore into them. Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? The country is full of runaway servants these days. Do you think I'm going to take good bread and wine and meat, freshly butchered, from my sheep shearers and give it to men I've never laid eyes on? Who knows where they've come from? David's men got out of there and went back and told David what he had said. David said, Strap on your swords. They all strapped on their swords, David and his men, and set out, 400 of them. 200 stayed behind to guard the camp. Meanwhile, one of the young shepherds told Abigail, Nabal's wife, what had happened. David sent messengers from the back country to salute our master, but he tore into them with insults. Yet these men treated us very well. They took nothing from us and didn't take advantage of us all the time we were in the fields. They formed a wall around us, protecting us day and night all the time we were out tending the sheep. Do something quickly because big trouble is ahead for our master and all of us. Nobody can talk to him. He's impossible, a real brute. Abigail flew into action. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep dressed out and ready for cooking, a bushel of roasted grain, 100 raisin cakes, and 200 fig cakes, and she had it all loaded on some donkeys. Then she said to her young servants, Go ahead and pave the way for me. I'm right behind you. But she said nothing to her husband Nabal. As she was riding her donkey, descending into a ravine, David and his men were descending from the other end, so they met there on the road. David had just said, That sure was a waste, guarding everything this man had out in the wild so that nothing he had was lost, and now he rewards me with insults? A real slap in the face. May God do his worst to me if Nabal and every cur in his misbegotten brood isn't dead meat by morning. As soon as Abigail saw David, she got off her donkey and fell on her knees at his feet, her face to the ground in homage, saying, My master, let me take the blame. Let me speak to you. Listen to what I have to say. Don't dwell on what that brute Nabal did. He acts out the meaning of his name. Nabal, fool. Foolishness oozes from him. I wasn't there when the young men my master sent arrived. I didn't see them. And now, my master, as God lives and as you live, God has kept you from this avenging murder. And may your enemies, all who seek my master's harm, end up like Nabal. Now, take this gift that I, your servant girl, have brought to my master, and give it to the young men who follow in the steps of my master. Forgive my presumption, but God is at work in my master, developing a rule solid and dependable. My master fights God's battles. As long as you live, no evil will stick to you. If anyone stands in your way, if anyone tries to get you out of the way, know this: your God-honored life is tightly bound in the bundle of God-protected life. But the lives of your enemies will be hurled aside, as a stone is thrown from a sling. When God completes all the goodness he has promised my master and sets you up as prince over Israel, my master will not have this dead weight in his heart, the guilt of an avenging murder. And when God has worked things for good for my master, remember me." And David said, "Blessed be God, the God of Israel. He sent you to meet me. And blessed be your good sense. Bless you for keeping me from murder and taking charge of looking out for me." A close call. As God lives, the God of Israel, who kept me from hurting you. If you had not come as quickly as you did, stopping me in my tracks, by morning there would have been nothing left of Nabal but dead meat. Then David accepted the gift she brought him and said, "Return home in peace. I have heard what you've said, and I'll do what you've asked." When Abigail got home, she found Nabal presiding over a huge banquet. He was in high spirits and very, very drunk. So she didn't tell him anything of what she'd done until morning. But in the morning, after Nabal had sobered up, she told him the whole story. Right then and there, he had a heart attack and fell into a coma. About 10 days later, God finished him off, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be God, who has stood up for me against Nabal's insults, kept me from an evil act, and let Nabal's evil boomerang back on him." Then David sent for Abigail to tell her that he wanted her for his wife. David's servants went to Abigail at Carmel with the message, "David sent for us to bring you to marry him." She got up and then bowed down, face to the ground, saying, "I'm your servant, ready to do anything you want. I'll even wash the feet of my master's servants." Abigail didn't linger. She got on her donkey and, with her 5 maids in attendance, went with the messengers to David and became his wife. David also married Ahinoam of Jezreel. Both women were his wives. Saul had married off David's wife Michal to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim. Chapter 26. Obsessed with a single flea. Some Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Did you know that David is hiding out on the Hakilah hill just opposite Jeshimon?" Saul was on his feet in a minute and on his way to the wilderness of Ziph, taking 3,000 of his best men, the pick of the crop, to hunt for David in that wild desert. He camped just off the road at the Hakilah hill, opposite Jeshimon. David, still out in the back country, knew Saul had come after him. He sent scouts to determine his precise location. Then David set out and came to the place where Saul had set up camp and saw for himself where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, his general, were staying. Saul was safely inside the camp, encircled by the army. Taking charge, David spoke to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother. "Who will go down with me and enter Saul's camp?" Abishai whispered, "I'll go with you." So David and Abishai entered the encampment by night, and there he was, Saul, stretched out asleep at the center of the camp, his spear stuck in the ground near his head, with Abner and the troops sound asleep on all sides. Abishai said, "This is the moment. God has put your enemy in your grasp. Let me nail him to the ground with his spear. One hit will do it, believe me. I won't need a second." But David said to Abishai, "Don't you dare hurt him. Who could lay a hand on God's anointed and even think of getting away with it?" He went on, "As God lives, either God will strike him, or his time will come and he'll die in bed, or he'll fall in battle, but God forbid that I should lay a finger on God's anointed. Now, grab the spear at his head and the water jug, and let's get out of here." David took the spear and water jug that were right beside Saul's head, and they slipped away. Not a soul saw. Not a soul knew. No one woke up. They all slept through the whole thing. A blanket of deep sleep from God had fallen on them. Then David went across to the opposite hill and stood far away on the top of the mountain. With this safe distance between them, he shouted across to the army and Abner, son of Ner, "Hey, Abner, how long do I have to wait for you to wake up and answer me?" Abner said, "Who's calling?" "Aren't you in charge there?" said David. "Why aren't you minding the store? Why weren't you standing guard over your master, the king, when a soldier came to kill the king, your master?" Bad form. As God lives, your life should be forfeit, you and the entire bodyguard. Look what I have. The king's spear and water jug that were right beside his head. By now, Saul had recognized David's voice and said, "Is that you, my son, David?" David said, "Yes, it's me, O king, my master. Why are you after me, hunting me down? What have I done? What crime have I committed? Oh, my master, my king, listen to this from your servant. If God has stirred you up against me, then I gladly offer my life as a sacrifice. But if it's men who have done it, let them be banished from God's presence. They've expelled me from my rightful place in God's heritage, sneering, 'Out of here. Go get a job with some other god.' But you're not getting rid of me that easily. You'll not separate me from God in life or death." The absurdity. The king of Israel, obsessed with a single flea, hunting me down, a mere partridge, out in the hills. Saul confessed, "I've sinned. Oh, come back, my dear son David. I won't hurt you anymore. You've honored me this day, treating my life as most precious. And I've acted the fool, a moral dunce, a real clown." David answered, "See what I have here? The king's spear. Let one of your servants come and get it. It's God's business to decide what to do with each of us in regard to what's right and who's loyal. God put your life in my hands today, but I wasn't willing to lift a finger against God's anointed. Just as I honored your life today, may God honor my life and rescue me from all trouble." Saul said to David, "Bless you, dear son David. Yes, do what you have to do. And yes, succeed in all you attempt." Then David went on his way, and Saul went home. Chapter 27. David thought to himself, "Sooner or later, Saul's going to get me. The best thing I can do is escape the Philistine country. Saul will count me a lost cause and quit hunting me down in every nook and cranny of Israel. I'll be out of his reach for good." So David left. He and his 600 men went to Achish, son of Moach, king of Gath. They moved in and settled down in Gath with Achish. Each man brought his household. David brought his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, widow of Nabal of Carmel. When Saul was told that David had escaped to Gath, he called off the hunt. Then David said to Achish, "If it's agreeable to you, assign me a place in one of the rural villages. It doesn't seem right that I, your mere servant, should be taking up space in the royal city." So Achish assigned him Ziklag. This is how Ziklag got to be what it is now, a city of the kings of Judah. David lived in Philistine country a year and 4 months. From time to time, David and his men raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. These people were long-time inhabitants of the land stretching toward Shur and on to Egypt. When David raided an area, he left no one alive, neither man nor woman, but took everything else: sheep, cattle, donkeys, camels, clothing, the works. Then he'd return to Achish. Achish would ask, "And whom did you raid today?" David would tell them, "Oh, the Negev of Judah, or the Negev of Jerahmeel, or the Negev of the Kenites." He never left a single person alive, lest one show up in Gath and report what David had really been doing. This is the way David operated all the time he lived in Philistine country. Achish came to trust David completely. He thought, "He's made himself so repugnant to his people that he'll be in my camp forever." Chapter 28. During this time, the Philistines mustered their troops to make war on Israel. Achish said to David, "You can count on this. You're marching with my troops, you and your men." And David said, "Good. Now you'll see for yourself what I can do." "Great," said Achish. "I'm making you my personal bodyguard for life." Saul prayed, but God didn't answer. Samuel was now dead. All Israel had mourned his death and buried him in Ramah, his hometown. Saul had long since cleaned out all those who held seances with the dead. The Philistines had mustered their troops and camped at Shunem. Saul had assembled all Israel and camped at Gilboa. But when Saul saw the Philistine troops, he shook in his boots, scared to death. Saul prayed to God, But God didn't answer, neither by dream, nor by sign, nor by prophet. So Saul ordered his officials, "Find me someone who can call up spirits, so I may go and seek counsel from those spirits." His servant said, "There's a witch at Endor." Saul disguised himself by putting on different clothes. Then, taking 2 men with him, he went under the cover of night to the woman and said, "I want you to consult a ghost for me. Call up the person I name." The woman said, "Just hold on now. You know what Saul did, how he swept the country clean of mediums. Why are you trying to trap me and get me killed?" Saul swore solemnly, "As God lives, you won't get in any trouble for this." The woman said, "So whom do you want me to bring up?" "Samuel. Bring me Samuel." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out loudly to Saul, "Why did you lie to me? You're Saul." The king told her, "You have nothing to fear, but what do you see?" "I see a spirit ascending from the underground." "And what does he look like?" Saul asked. "An old man ascending, robed like a priest." Saul knew it was Samuel. He fell down, face to the ground, and worshipped. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by calling me up?" "Because I'm in deep trouble," said Saul. "The Philistines are making war against me, and God has deserted me. He doesn't answer me anymore, either by prophet or by dream. And so I'm calling on you to tell me what to do." "Why ask me?" said Samuel. "God has turned away from you and is now on the side of your neighbor. God has done exactly what he told you through me, ripped the kingdom right out of your hands and given it to your neighbor. It's because you did not obey God, refused to carry out his seething judgment on Amalek, that God does to you what he is doing today. Worse yet, God is turning Israel, along with you, over to the Philistines. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. And yes, indeed, God is giving Israel's army up to the Philistines." Saul dropped to the ground, felled like a tree, terrified by Samuel's words. There wasn't an ounce of strength left in him. He'd eaten nothing all day and all night. The woman, realizing that he was in deep shock, said to him, "Listen to me. I did what you asked me to do. Put my life in your hands in doing it. Carried out your instructions to the letter. It's your turn to do what I tell you. Let me give you some food. Eat it. It will give you strength so you can get on your way." He refused. "I'm not eating anything." But when his servants joined the woman in urging him, he gave in to their pleas, picked himself up off the ground, and sat on the bed. The woman moved swiftly. She butchered a grain-fed calf she had and took some flour, kneaded it, and baked some flatbread. Then she served it all up for Saul and his servants. After dining handsomely, they got up from the table and were on their way that same night. Chapter 29. The Philistines mustered all their troops at Aphek. Meanwhile, Israel had made camp at the spring at Jezreel. As the Philistine warlords marched forward by regiments and divisions, David and his men were bringing up the rear with Achish. The Philistine officers said, "What business do these Hebrews have being here?" Achish answered the officers, "Don't you recognize David, ex-servant of King Saul of Israel? He's been with me a long time. I found nothing to be suspicious of, nothing to complain about, from the day he defected from Saul until now." Angry with Achish, the Philistine officers said, "Send this man back to where he came from. Let him stick to his normal duties. He's not going into battle with us. He'd switch sides in the middle of the fight. What better chance to get back in favor with his master than by stabbing us in the back? Isn't this the same David they celebrate at their parties, singing, 'Saul kills by the 1,000, David by the 10,000'? So Achish had to send for David and tell him, "As God lives, you've been a trusty ally, excellent in all the ways you have worked with me, beyond reproach in the ways you have conducted yourself. But the warlords don't see it that way. So it's best that you leave peacefully now. It's not worth it, displeasing the Philistine warlords." "But what have I done?" said David. "Have you had a single cause for complaint from the day I joined up with you until now? Why can't I fight against the enemies of my master, the king?" "I agree," said Achish. "You're a good man, as far as I'm concerned, God's angel." But the Philistine officers were emphatic. "He's not to go with us into battle. So get an early start, you and the men who came with you. As soon as you have light enough to travel, go." David rose early, he and his men, and by daybreak they were on their way back to Philistine country. The Philistines went on to Jezreel. Chapter 30. David's strength was in his God. 3 days later, David and his men arrived back in Ziklag. Amalekites had raided the Negev and Ziklag. They tore Ziklag to pieces and then burned it down. They captured all the women, young and old. They didn't kill anyone, but drove them like a herd of cattle. By the time David and his men entered the village, it had been burned to the ground, and their wives, sons, and daughters all taken prisoner. David and his men burst out in loud wails, wept and wept until they were exhausted with weeping. David's 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, widow of Nabal of Carmel, had been taken prisoner along with the rest, and suddenly David was in even worse trouble. There was talk among the men, bitter over the loss of their families, of stoning him. David strengthened himself with trust in his God. He ordered Abiathar the priest, son of Ahimelech, "Bring me the ephod so I can consult God." Abiathar brought it to David. Then David prayed to God, "Shall I go after these raiders? Can I catch them?" The answer came, "Go after them. Yes, you'll catch them. Yes, you'll make the rescue." David went, he and the 600 men with him. They arrived at the brook Besor, where some of them dropped out. David and 400 men kept up the pursuit, but 200 of them were too fatigued to cross the brook Besor and stayed there. Some who went on came across an Egyptian in a field and took him to David. They gave him bread, and he ate, and he drank some water. They gave him a piece of fig cake and a couple of raisin muffins. Life began to revive in him. He hadn't eaten or drunk a thing for 3 days and nights. David said to him, "Who do you belong to? Where are you from?" "I'm an Egyptian slave of an Amalekite," he said. "My master walked off and left me when I got sick. It was 3 days ago. We had raided the Negev of the Kerethites, of Judah, and of Caleb. Ziklag we burned." David asked him, "Can you take us to the raiders?" "Promise me by God," he said, "that you won't kill me or turn me over to my old master, and I'll take you straight to the raiders." He led David to them. They were scattered all over the place, eating and drinking, gorging themselves on all the loot they had plundered from Philistia and Judah. David pounced. He fought them from before sunrise until evening of the next day. None got away except for 400 of the younger men who escaped by riding off on camels. David rescued everything the Amalekites had taken, and he rescued his 2 wives. Nothing and no one was missing, young or old, son or daughter, plunder or whatever. David recovered the whole lot. He herded the sheep and cattle before them, and they all shouted, "David's plunder!" Then David came to the 200 who had been too tired to continue with him and had dropped out at the brook Besor. They came out to welcome David and his band. As he came near, he called out, "Success!" But all the mean-spirited men who had marched with David, the rabble element, objected. "They didn't help in the rescue. They don't get any of the plunder we recovered. Each man can have his wife and children, but that's it. Take them and go." "Families don't do this sort of thing." "Oh, no, my brothers," said David as he broke up the argument. "You can't act this way with what God gave us. God kept us safe. He handed over the raiders who attacked us. Who would ever listen to this kind of talk? The share of the one who stays with the gear is the share of the one who fights. Equal shares. Share and share alike." From that day on, David made that the rule in Israel, and it still is. On returning to Ziklag, David sent portions of the plunder to the elders of Judah, his neighbors, with a note saying, "A gift from the plunder of God's enemies." He sent them to the elders in Bethel, Ramoth Negev, Jatir, Aror, Sifmoth, Eshtemoa, Rachel, Jerahmeelite cities, Kenite cities, Hormah, Bor-Ashan, Atak, and Hebron, along with a number of other places David and his men went to from time to time. Chapter 31. Saul and Jonathan, dead on the mountain. The Philistines made war on Israel. The men of Israel were in full retreat from the Philistines, falling left and right, wounded on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines caught up with Saul and his sons. They killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons. The battle was hot and heavy around Saul. The archers got his range and wounded him badly. Saul said to his weapon-bearer, "Draw your sword and put me out of my misery, lest these pagan pigs come and make a game out of killing me." But his weapon-bearer wouldn't do it. He was terrified. So Saul took the sword himself and fell on it. When the weapon bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul, his 3 sons, and his weapon bearer, the men closest to him, died together that day. When the Israelites in the valley opposite and those on the other side of the Jordan saw that their army was in full retreat and that Saul and his sons were dead, they left their cities and ran for their lives. The Philistines moved in and occupied the sites. The next day, when the Philistines came to rob the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons dead on Mount Gilboa. They cut off Saul's head and stripped off his armor. Then they spread the good news all through Philistine country in the shrines of their idols and among the people. They displayed his armor in the shrine of the Ashtoreth. They nailed his corpse to the wall at Bethshan. The people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul. Their valiant men sprang into action. They traveled all night, took the corpses of Saul and his 3 sons from the wall at Bethshan, and carried them back to Jabesh, and burned off the flesh. Then they buried the bones under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted in mourning for 7 days. 2 Samuel, chapter 1. Shortly after Saul died, David returned to Ziklag from his rout of the Amalekites. 3 days later, a man showed up unannounced from Saul's army camp. Disheveled and obviously in mourning, he fell to his knees in respect before David. David asked, "What brings you here?" He answered, "I've just escaped from the camp of Israel." "So what happened?" said David. "What's the news?" He said, "The Israelites have fled the battlefield, leaving a lot of their dead comrades behind. And Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." David pressed the young soldier for details. "How do you know for sure that Saul and Jonathan are dead?" "I just happened by Mount Gilboa and came on Saul, badly wounded and leaning on his spear, with enemy chariots and horsemen bearing down hard on him. He looked behind him, saw me, and called me to him. 'Yes, sir,' I said, 'at your service.' He asked me who I was, and I told him, 'I'm an Amalekite.' 'Come here,' he said, 'and put me out of my misery. I'm nearly dead already, but my life hangs on.' So I did what he asked. I killed him. I knew he wouldn't last much longer anyway. I removed his royal headband and bracelet and have brought them to my master. Here they are." In lament, David ripped his clothes to ribbons. All the men with him did the same. They wept and fasted the rest of the day, grieving the death of Saul and his son Jonathan, and also the army of God and the nation Israel, victims in a failed battle. Then David spoke to the young soldier who had brought the report. "Who are you, anyway?" "I'm from an immigrant family, an Amalekite." "Do you mean to say," said David, "that you weren't afraid to up and kill God's anointed king?" Right then, he ordered one of his soldiers, "Strike him dead." The soldier struck him, and he died. "You asked for it," David told him. "You sealed your death sentence when you said you killed God's anointed king." Then David sang this lament over Saul and his son Jonathan, and gave orders that everyone in Judah learn it by heart. Yes, it's even inscribed in the book of Jasher. Oh, gazelles of Israel, struck down on your hills, the mighty warriors, fallen, fallen. Don't announce it in the city of Gath. Don't post the news in the streets of Ashkelon. Don't give those coarse Philistine girls one more excuse for a drunken party. No more dew or rain for you, hills of Gilboa, and not a drop from springs and wells. For there the warriors' shields were dragged through the mud, Saul's shield left there to rot. Jonathan's bow was bold. The bigger they were, the harder they fell. Saul's sword was fearless. Once out of the scabbard, nothing could stop it. Saul and Jonathan, beloved, beautiful, together in life, together in death. Swifter than plummeting eagles, stronger than proud lions. Women of Israel, weep for Saul. He dressed you in finest cottons and silks, spared no expense in making you elegant. The mighty warriors, fallen in the middle of the fight. Jonathan, struck down on your hills. Oh, my dear brother Jonathan, I'm crushed by your death. Your friendship was a miracle wonder, love far exceeding anything I've known or ever hoped to know. The mighty warriors, fallen, and the arms of war broken to bits. Chapter 2. After all this, David prayed. He asked God, "Shall I move to one of the cities of Judah?" God said, "Yes, move." "And to which city?" "To Hebron." So David moved to Hebron, along with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David's men, along with their families, also went with him and made their home in and around Hebron. The citizens of Judah came to Hebron, and then and there made David king over the clans of Judah. A report was brought to David that the men of Jabesh-Gilead had given Saul a decent burial. David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh-Gilead. "God bless you for this, for honoring your master, Saul, with a funeral. God honor you and be true to you, and I'll do the same, matching your generous act of goodness. Strengthen your resolve and do what must be done. Your master, Saul, is dead. The citizens of Judah have made me their king." In the meantime, Abner, son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, had taken Saul's son, Ishbosheth, to Mahanaim and made him king over Gilead, over Asher, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, king, as it turns out, over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he was made king over Israel. He lasted only 2 years. But the people of Judah stuck with David. David ruled the people of Judah from Hebron for 7.5 years. One day, Abner, son of Ner, set out from Mahanaim with the soldiers of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, headed for Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, with David's soldiers, also set out. They met at the pool of Gibeon, Abner's group on one side, Joab's on the other. Abner challenged Joab. "Put up your best fighters. Let's see them do their stuff." Joab said, "Good. Let them go at it." So they lined up for the fight, 12 Benjaminites from the side of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and 12 soldiers from David's side. The men from each side grabbed their opponents' heads and stabbed them with their daggers. They all fell dead, the whole bunch together. So they called the place Slaughter Park. It's right there at Gibeon. The fighting went from bad to worse throughout the day. Abner and the men of Israel were beaten to a pulp by David's men. The 3 sons of Zeruiah were present: Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Asahel, as fast as a wild antelope on the open plain, chased Abner, staying hard on his heels. Abner turned and said, "Is that you, Asahel?" "It surely is," he said. Abner said, "Let up on me. Pick on someone you have a chance of beating, and be content with those spoils." But Asahel wouldn't let up. Abner tried again. "Turn back! Don't force me to kill you! How would I face your brother Joab?" When he refused to quit, Abner struck him in the belly with the blunt end of his spear so hard that it came out his back. Asahel fell to the ground and died at once. Everyone who arrived at the spot where Asahel fell and died stood and gaped. Asahel, dead. But Joab and Abishai kept up the chase after Abner. As the sun began to set, they came to the hill of Ammah that faced Giah on the road to the back country of Gibeon. The Benjaminites had taken their stand with Abner there, deployed strategically on a hill. Abner called out to Joab, "Are we going to keep killing each other till doomsday? Don't you know that nothing but bitterness will come from this? How long before you call off your men from chasing their brothers?" "As God lives," said Joab, "if you hadn't spoken up, we'd have kept up the chase until morning." Then he blew the ram's horn trumpet, and the whole army of Judah stopped in its tracks. They quit chasing Israel and called off the fighting. Abner and his soldiers marched all that night up the Arabah Valley. They crossed the Jordan and, after a long morning's march, arrived at Mahanaim. After Joab returned from chasing Abner, he took a head count of the army. 19 of David's men, besides Asahel, were missing. David's men had cut down 360 of Abner's men, all Benjaminites, all dead. They brought Asahel and buried him in the family tomb in Bethlehem. Joab and his men then marched all night, arriving in Hebron as the dawn broke. Chapter 3. The war between the house of Saul and the house of David dragged on and on. The longer it went on, the stronger David became, with the house of Saul getting weaker. During the Hebron years, sons were born to David. Amnon, born of Ahinoam of Jezreel, the firstborn. Chileab, born of Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow, his second. Absalom, born of Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, the third. Adonijah, born of Haggith, the fourth. Shephatiah, born of Abital, the fifth. Ithream, born of Eglah, the sixth. These 6 sons of David were born in Hebron. Abner took advantage of the continuing war between the house of Saul and the house of David to gain power for himself. Saul had had a concubine, Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. One day Ishbosheth confronted Abner. "What business do you have sleeping with my father's concubine?" Abner lost his temper with Ishbosheth. "Treat me like a dog, will you? Is this the thanks I get for sticking by the house of your father, Saul, and all his family and friends? I personally saved you from certain capture by David, and you make an issue out of my going to bed with a woman? What God promised David, I'll help accomplish. Transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and make David ruler over the whole country, both Israel and Judah, from Dan to Beersheba. If not, may God do his worst to me." Ishbosheth, cowed by Abner's outburst, couldn't say another word. Abner went ahead and sent personal messengers to David. "Make a deal with me, and I'll help bring the whole country of Israel over to you." "Great," said David. "It's a deal, but only on one condition. You're not welcome here unless you bring Michal, Saul's daughter, with you when you come to meet me." David then sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Saul. "Give me back Michal, whom I won as my wife at the cost of 100 Philistine foreskins." Ishbosheth ordered that she be taken from her husband Paltiel, son of Laish. But Paltiel followed her, weeping all the way, to Bahurim. There Abner told him, "Go home." And he went home. Abner got the elders of Israel together and said, "Only yesterday, it seems, you were looking for a way to make David your king. So do it, now, for God has given the go-ahead on David. By my servant David's hand, I'll save my people Israel from the oppression of the Philistines and all their other enemies." Abner took the Benjaminites aside and spoke to them. Then he went to Hebron for a private talk with David, telling him everything that Israel in general and Benjamin in particular were planning to do. When Abner and the 20 men who were with him met with David in Hebron, David laid out a feast for them. Abner then said, "I'm ready. Let me go now to rally everyone in Israel for my master, the king. They'll make a treaty with you, authorizing you to rule them however you see fit." Abner was sent off with David's blessing. Soon after that, David's men, led by Joab, came back from a field assignment. Abner was no longer in Hebron with David, having just been dismissed with David's blessing. As Joab and his raiding party arrived, they were told that Abner, the son of Ner, had been there with David and had been sent off with David's blessing. Joab went straight to the king. "What's this you've done? Abner shows up and you let him walk away scot-free? You know Abner, son of Ner, better than that. This was no friendly visit. He was here to spy on you, figure out your comings and goings, find out what you're up to." Joab left David and went into action. He sent messengers after Abner. They caught up with him at the well of Sirah and brought him back. David knew nothing of all this. When Abner got back to Hebron, Joab steered him aside at the gate for a personal word with him. There, he stabbed him in the belly, killed him in cold blood for the murder of his brother Asahel. Later on, when David heard what had happened, he said, "Before God, I and my kingdom are totally innocent of this murder of Abner, son of Ner. Joab and his entire family will always be under the curse of this blood guilt. May they forever be victims of crippling diseases, violence, and famine." Joab and his brother, Abishai, murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel at the battle of Gibeon. David ordered Joab and all the men under him, "Rip your cloaks into rags, wear mourning clothes, lead Abner's funeral procession with loud lament." King David followed the coffin. They buried Abner in Hebron. The king's voice was loud in lament as he wept at the side of Abner's grave. All the people wept, too. Then the king sang this tribute to Abner. Can this be? Abner, dead like a nameless bum? You were a free man, free to go and do as you wished. Yet you fell as a victim in a street brawl. And all the people wept, a crescendo of crying. They all came then to David, trying to get him to eat something before dark. But David solemnly swore, I'll not so much as taste a piece of bread, or anything else for that matter, before sunset, so help me God. Everyone at the funeral took notice and liked what they saw. In fact, everything the king did was applauded by the people. It was clear to everyone that day, including all Israel, that the king had nothing to do with the death of Abner, son of Ner. The king spoke to his servants. You realize, don't you, that today a prince and hero fell victim of foul play in Israel? And I, though anointed king, was helpless to do anything about it. These sons of Zeruiah are too much for me. God, requite the criminal for his crime. Chapter 4. The Murder of Ishbosheth. Saul's son, Ishbosheth, heard that Abner had died in Hebron. His heart sank. The whole country was shaken. Ishbosheth had 2 men who were captains of raiding bands. One was named Baanah, the other Rechab. They were sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, a Benjaminite. The people of Beeroth had been assigned to Benjamin ever since they escaped to Gittaim. They still lived there as resident aliens. It so happened that Saul's son, Jonathan, had a son who was maimed in both feet. When he was 5 years old, the report on Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and ran, but in her hurry to get away, she fell, and the boy was maimed. His name was Mephibosheth. One day, Baanah and Rechab, the 2 sons of Rimmon, headed out for the house of Ishbosheth. They arrived at the hottest time of the day, just as he was taking his afternoon nap. They entered the house on a ruse, pretending official business. The maid guarding the bedroom had fallen asleep, so Rechab and Baanah slipped by her and entered the room where Ishbosheth was asleep on his bed. They killed him and then cut off his head, carrying it off as a trophy. They traveled all night long, taking the route through the Arabah Valley. They presented the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, telling the king, Here's the head of Ishbosheth, Saul's son, your enemy. He was out to kill you, but God has given vengeance to my master, the king, vengeance this very day on Saul and his children. David answered the brothers Rechab and Baanah, sons of Rimmon the Beerothite. As surely as God lives, the one who got me out of every trouble I've ever been in, when the messenger told me, Good news, Saul is dead, supposing I'd be delighted, I arrested him and killed him on the spot in Ziklag. That's what he got for his so-called good news. And now you show up? Evil men who killed an innocent man in cold blood? A man asleep in his own house? Don't think I won't find you guilty of murder and rid the country of you. David then issued orders to his soldiers. They killed the 2, chopped off their hands and feet, and hung the corpses at the pool in Hebron. But Ishbosheth's head they took and buried in Abner's tomb in Hebron. Chapter 5. Before long, all the tribes of Israel approached David in Hebron and said, Look at us, your own flesh and blood. In time past, when Saul was our king, you're the one who really ran the country. Even then, God said to you, You will shepherd my people Israel, and you'll be the prince. All the leaders of Israel met with King David at Hebron, and the king made a treaty with them in the presence of God. And so they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king and ruled for 40 years. In Hebron, he ruled Judah for 7.5 years. In Jerusalem, he ruled all Israel and Judah for 33 years. David and his men immediately set out for Jerusalem to take on the Jebusites who lived in that country. But they said, You might as well go home. Even the blind and the lame could keep you out. You can't get in here. They had convinced themselves that David couldn't break through. But David went right ahead and captured the fortress of Zion, known ever since as the City of David. That day David said, To get the best of these Jebusites, one must target the water system, not to mention this so-called lame and blind bunch that David hates. In fact, he was so sick and tired of it, people coined the expression, "no lame and blind allowed in the palace." David made the fortress city his home and named it City of David. He developed the city from the outside terraces inward. David proceeded with a longer stride, a larger embrace, since the God of the angel armies was with him. It was at this time that Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, along with timbers of cedar. He also sent carpenters and masons to build a house for David. David took this as a sign that God had confirmed him as king of Israel, giving his kingship world prominence for the sake of Israel, his people. David took on more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he left Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to him. These are the names of those born to him in Jerusalem: Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, Eliphalet. When the Philistines got word that David had been made king over all Israel, they came on the hunt for him. David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. When the Philistines arrived, they deployed their forces in Rephaim Valley. Then David prayed to God, "Shall I go up and fight the Philistines? Will you help me beat them?" "Go up," God replied. "Count on me. I'll help you beat them." David then went straight to Baal Perazim and smashed them to pieces. Afterwards, David said, "God exploded on my enemies like a gush of water." That's why David named the place Baal Perazim, the master who explodes. The retreating Philistines dumped their idols, and David and his soldiers took them away. Later, there was a repeat performance. The Philistines came up again and deployed their troops in the Rephaim Valley. David again prayed to God. This time, God said, "Don't attack them head on. Instead, circle around behind them and ambush them from the grove of sacred trees. When you hear the sound of shuffling in the trees, get ready to move out. It's a signal that God is going ahead of you to smash the Philistine camp." David did exactly what God told him. He routed the Philistines all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. Chapter 6. David mustered the pick of the troops of Israel, 30 divisions of them. Together with his soldiers, David headed for Baalah to recover the chest of God, which was called by the name God of the angel armies, who was enthroned over the pair of angels on the chest. They placed the chest of God on a brand new ox cart and removed it from Abinadab's house on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, Abinadab's sons, were driving the new cart loaded with the chest of God, Ahio in the lead and Uzzah alongside the chest. David and the whole company of Israel were in the parade, singing at the top of their lungs and playing mandolins, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled. So Uzzah reached out and grabbed the chest of God. God blazed in anger against Uzzah and struck him hard because he had profaned the chest. Uzzah died on the spot, right alongside the chest. Then David got angry because of God's deadly outburst against Uzzah. That place is still called Perez Uzzah, the explosion against Uzzah. David became fearful of God that day and said, "This chest is too hot to handle. How can I ever get it back to the city of David?" He refused to take the chest of God a step farther. Instead, David removed it off the road and to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The chest of God stayed at the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and God prospered Obed-Edom and his entire household. It was reported to King David that God had prospered Obed-Edom and his entire household because of the chest of God. So David thought, "I'll get that blessing for myself," and went and brought up the chest of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David, celebrating extravagantly all the way, with frequent sacrifices of choice bulls. David, ceremonially dressed in priest's linen, danced with great abandon before God. The whole country was with him as he accompanied the chest of God with shouts and trumpet blasts. But as the chest of God came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, happened to be looking out a window. When she saw King David leaping and dancing before God, her heart filled with scorn. They brought the chest of God and set it in the middle of the tent pavilion that David had pitched for it. Then and there David worshipped, offering burnt offerings and peace offerings. When David had completed the sacrifices of burnt and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of God of the angel armies, and handed out to each person in the crowd, men and women alike, a loaf of bread, a date cake, and a raisin cake. Then everyone went home. David returned home to bless his family. Michal, Saul's daughter, came out to greet him. How wonderfully the king has distinguished himself today, exposing himself to the eyes of the servants' maids like some burlesque street dancer. David replied to Michal, "In God's presence, I'll dance all I want. He chose me over your father and the rest of our family and made me prince over God's people, over Israel. Oh yes, I'll dance to God's glory, more recklessly even than this. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll gladly look like a fool. But among these maids you're so worried about, I'll be honored no end." Michal, Saul's daughter, was barren the rest of her life. Chapter 7. God's Covenant with David. Before long, the king made himself at home, and God gave him peace from all his enemies. Then, one day, King David said to Nathan the prophet, "Look at this. Here I am, comfortable in a luxurious house of cedar, and the chest of God sits in a plain tent." Nathan told the king, "Whatever is on your heart, go and do it. God is with you." But that night, the word of God came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, this is God's word on the matter. You're going to build a house for me to live in? Why, I haven't lived in a house from the time I brought the children of Israel up from Egypt till now. All that time I've moved about with nothing but a tent. And in all my travels with Israel, did I ever say to any of the leaders I commanded to shepherd Israel, 'Why haven't you built me a house of cedar?' So, here is what you are to tell my servant David. The God of the angel armies has this word for you. I took you from the pasture, tagging along after sheep, and made you prince over my people Israel. I was with you everywhere you went and mowed your enemies down before you. Now I'm making you famous, to be ranked with the great names on earth. And I'm going to set aside a place for my people Israel and plant them there so they'll have their own home and not be knocked around anymore. Nor will evil men afflict you as they always have, even during the days I set judges over my people Israel. Finally, I'm going to give you peace from all your enemies." Furthermore, God has this message for you. God himself will build you a house. When your life is complete and you're buried with your ancestors, then I'll raise up your child, your own flesh and blood, to succeed you, and I'll firmly establish his rule. He will build a house to honor me, and I will guarantee his kingdom's rule permanently. I'll be a father to him, and he'll be a son to me. When he does wrong, I'll discipline him in the usual ways, the pitfalls and obstacles of this mortal life. But I'll never remove my gracious love from him, as I removed it from Saul, who preceded you, and whom I most certainly did remove. Your family and your kingdom are permanently secured. I'm keeping my eye on them, and your royal throne will always be there, rock solid." Nathan gave David a complete and accurate account of everything he heard and saw in the vision. King David went in, took his place before God, and prayed, "Who am I, my master God, and what is my family that you have brought me to this place in life? But that's nothing compared to what's coming, for you've also spoken of my family far into the future, given me a glimpse into tomorrow, my master God. What can I possibly say in the face of all this? You know me, Master God, just as I am. You've done all this not because of who I am, but because of who you are, out of your very heart. But you've let me in on it. This is what makes you so great, Master God. There is none like you, no God but you, nothing to compare with what we've heard with our own ears. And who is like your people, like Israel, a nation unique in the earth, whom God set out to redeem for himself, and became most famous for it, performing great and fearsome acts, throwing out nations and their gods left and right as you saved your people from Egypt. You established for yourself a people, your very own Israel, your people permanently, and you, God, became their God. So now, great God, this word that you have spoken to me and my family, guarantee it permanently. Do exactly what you've promised. Then your reputation will flourish always as people exclaim, the God of the angel armies is God over Israel. And the house of your servant David will remain sure and solid in your watchful presence. For you, God of the angel armies, Israel's God, told me plainly, I will build you a house. That's how I was able to find the courage to pray this prayer to you. And now, Master God, being the God you are, speaking sure words as you do, and having just said this wonderful thing to me, please, just one more thing. Bless my family. Keep your eye on them always. You've already as much as said that you would, Master God. Oh, may your blessing be on my family permanently. Chapter 8. In the days that followed, David struck hard at the Philistines, brought them to their knees, and took control of the countryside. He also fought and defeated Moab. He chose 2/3 of them randomly and executed them. The other third he spared. So the Moabites fell under David's rule and were forced to bring tribute. On his way to restore his sovereignty at the river Euphrates, David next defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehob, the king of Zobah. He captured from him 1,000 chariots, 7,000 cavalry, and 20,000 infantry. He hamstrung all the chariot horses, but saved back 100. When the Arameans from Damascus came to the aid of Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 of them. David set up a puppet government in Aram Damascus. The Arameans became subjects of David and were forced to bring tribute. God gave victory to David wherever he marched. David plundered the gold shields that belonged to the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. He also looted a great quantity of bronze from Tebah and Berothai, cities of Hadadezer. Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had struck down the entire army of Hadadezer. So he sent his son Joram to King David to greet and congratulate him for fighting and defeating them, for Toi and Hadadezer were old enemies. He brought with him gifts of silver, gold, and bronze. King David consecrated these along with the silver and gold from all the nations he had conquered, from Aram, Moab, the Ammonites, the Philistines, and from Amalek, along with the plunder from Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. David built a victory monument on his return from defeating the Arameans. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, fought and defeated the Edomites in the Salt Valley. 18,000 of them were killed. David set up a puppet government in Edom, and the Edomites became subjects under David. God gave David victory wherever he marched. Thus, David ruled over all of Israel. He ruled well, fair and even-handed in all his duties and relationships. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was head of the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was clerk. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Sariah was secretary. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites, and David's sons were priests. Chapter 9. An open table for Mephibosheth. One day, David asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family? If so, I'd like to show him some kindness in honor of Jonathan." It happened that a servant from Saul's household named Ziba was there. They called him into David's presence. The king asked him, "Are you Ziba?" "Yes, sir," he replied. The king asked, "Is there anyone left from the family of Saul to whom I can show some godly kindness?" Ziba told the king, "Yes, there's Jonathan's son, lame in both feet." "Where is he?" "He's living at the home of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lo-debar." King David didn't lose a minute. He sent and got him from the home of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lo-debar. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, who was the son of Saul, came before David, he bowed deeply, abasing himself, honoring David. David spoke his name. "Mephibosheth?" "Yes, sir." "Don't be frightened," said David. "I'd like to do something special for you in memory of your father, Jonathan. To begin with, I'm returning to you all the properties of your grandfather, Saul. Furthermore, from now on, you'll take all your meals at my table." Shuffling and stammering, not looking him in the eye, Mephibosheth said, "Who am I that you pay attention to a stray dog like me?" David then called in Ziba, Saul's right-hand man, and told him, "Everything that belonged to Saul and his family, I've handed over to your master's grandson. You and your sons and your servants will work his land and bring in the produce, provisions for your master's grandson. Mephibosheth himself, your master's grandson, from now on will take all his meals at my table." Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. "All that my master the king has ordered his servant," answered Ziba, "your servant will surely do." And Mephibosheth ate at David's table, just like one of the royal family. Mephibosheth also had a small son named Micah. All who were part of Ziba's household were now the servants of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, taking all his meals at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. Chapter 10. Sometime after this, the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, succeeded him as king. David said, "I'd like to show some kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, treat him as well and as kindly as his father treated me." So David sent Hanun condolences regarding his father. But when David's servants got to the land of the Ammonites, the Ammonite leaders warned Hanun, their head delegate, "Do you for a minute suppose that David is honoring your father by sending you comforters? Don't you think it's because he wants to snoop around the city and size it up that David has sent his emissaries to you?" So Hanun seized David's men, shaved off half their beards, cut off their robes halfway up their buttocks, and sent them packing. When all this was reported to David, he sent someone to meet them, for they were seriously humiliated. The king told them, "Stay in Jericho until your beards grow out. Only then come back." When it dawned on the Ammonites that as far as David was concerned, they stunk to high heaven, they hired Aramean soldiers from Beth Rehob and Zobah, 20,000 infantry, and 1,000 men from the king of Maacah, and 12,000 men from Tob. When David heard of this, he dispatched Joab with his strongest fighters in full force. The Ammonites marched out and arranged themselves in battle formation at the city gate. The Arameans of Zobah and Rehob and the men of Tob and Maacah took up a position out in the open fields. When Joab saw that he had two fronts to fight, before and behind, he took his pick of the best of Israel and deployed them to confront the Arameans. The rest of the army he put under the command of Abishai, his brother, and deployed them to confront the Ammonites. Then he said, "If the Arameans are too much for me, you help me. And if the Ammonites prove too much for you, I'll come and help you. Courage. We'll fight with might and main for our people and for the cities of our God, and God will do whatever he sees needs doing." But when Joab and his soldiers moved in to fight the Arameans, they ran off in full retreat. Then the Ammonites, seeing the Arameans run for dear life, took to their heels from Abishai and went into the city. So Joab left off fighting the Ammonites and returned to Jerusalem. When the Arameans saw how badly they'd been beaten by Israel, they picked up the pieces and regrouped. Hadadezer sent for the Arameans who were across the river. They came to Helam. Shobak, commander of Hadadezer's army, led them. All this was reported to David. So David mustered Israel, crossed the Jordan, and came to Helam. The Arameans went into battle formation, ready for David, and the fight was on. But the Arameans again scattered before Israel. David killed 700 chariot drivers and 40,000 cavalry. And he mortally wounded Shobak, the army commander, who died on the battlefield. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace and became Israel's vassals. The Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites ever again. Chapter 11. David's Sin and Sorrow. When that time of year came around again, the anniversary of the Ammonite aggression, David dispatched Joab and his fighting men of Israel in full force to destroy the Ammonites for good. They laid siege to Rabbah, but David stayed in Jerusalem. One late afternoon, David got up from taking his nap and was strolling on the roof of the palace. From his vantage point on the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was stunningly beautiful. David sent to ask about her and was told, "Isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam and wife of Uriah the Hittite? David sent his agents to get her. After she arrived, he went to bed with her. This occurred during the time of purification following her period. Then she returned home. Before long, she realized she was pregnant. Later, she sent word to David, "I'm pregnant." David then got in touch with Joab. "Send Uriah the Hittite to me." Joab sent him. When he arrived, David asked him for news from the front, how things were going with Joab and the troops and with the fighting. Then he said to Uriah, "Go home, have a refreshing bath and a good night's rest." After Uriah left the palace, an informant of the king was sent after him. But Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance, along with the king's servants. David was told that Uriah had not gone home. He asked Uriah, "Didn't you just come off a hard trip? So why didn't you go home?" Uriah replied to David, "The chest is out there with the fighting men of Israel and Judah in tents. My master Joab and his servants are roughing it out in the fields. So how can I go home and eat and drink and enjoy my wife? On your life, I'll not do it." "All right," said David, "have it your way. Stay for the day, and I'll send you back tomorrow." So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem the rest of the day. The next day, David invited him to eat and drink with him, and David got him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah again went out and slept with his master's servants. He didn't go home. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In the letter, he wrote, "Put Uriah in the front lines where the fighting is the fiercest. Then, pull back and leave him exposed so that he's sure to be killed." So Joab, holding the city under siege, put Uriah in a place where he knew there were fierce enemy fighters. When the city's defenders came out to fight Joab, some of David's soldiers were killed, including Uriah the Hittite. Joab sent David a full report on the battle. He instructed the messenger, "After you have given to the king a detailed report on the battle, if he flares in anger, say, 'And by the way, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead.'" Joab's messenger arrived in Jerusalem and gave the king a full report. He said, "The enemy was too much for us. They advanced on us in the open field, and we pushed them back to the city gate. But then arrows came hot and heavy on us from the city wall, and 18 of the king's soldiers died." When the messenger completed his report of the battle, David got angry at Joab. He vented it on the messenger. "Why did you get so close to the city? Didn't you know you'd be attacked from the wall? Didn't you remember how Abimelech, son of Jerubbesheth, got killed? Wasn't it a woman who dropped a millstone on him from the wall and crushed him at Thebez? Why did you go so close to the wall?" "By the way," said Joab's messenger, "your servant, Uriah the Hittite, is dead." Then David told the messenger, "Oh, I see. Tell Joab, don't trouble yourself over this. War kills, sometimes one, sometimes another. You never know who's next. Redouble your assault on the city and destroy it. Encourage Joab." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she grieved for her husband. When the time of mourning was over, David sent someone to bring her to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. Chapter 12. But God was not at all pleased with what David had done, and sent Nathan to David. Nathan said to him, "There were 2 men in the same city, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had huge flocks of sheep, herds of cattle. The poor man had nothing but one little female lamb, which he had bought and raised. It grew up with him and his children as a member of the family. It ate off his plate and drank from his cup and slept on his bed. It was like a daughter to him. One day, a traveler dropped in on the rich man. He was too stingy to take an animal from his own herds or flocks to make a meal for his visitor. So he took the poor man's lamb and prepared a meal to set before his guest. David exploded in anger. "As surely as God lives," he said to Nathan, "the man who did this ought to be lynched. He must repay for the lamb 4 times over for his crime and his stinginess." "You're the man," said Nathan, "and here's what God, the God of Israel, has to say to you. I made you king over Israel. I freed you from the fist of Saul. I gave you your master's daughter and other wives to have and to hold. I gave you both Israel and Judah. And if that hadn't been enough, I'd have gladly thrown in much more. So why have you treated the word of God with brazen contempt, doing this great evil? You murdered Uriah the Hittite, then took his wife as your wife. Worse, you killed him with an Ammonite sword. And now, because you treated God with such contempt and took Uriah the Hittite's wife as your wife, killing and murder will continually plague your family. This is God speaking, remember? I'll make trouble for you out of your own family. I'll take your wives from right out in front of you. I'll give them to some neighbor, and he'll go to bed with them openly. You did your deed in secret. I'm doing mine with the whole country watching. Then David confessed to Nathan, I've sinned against God. Nathan pronounced, Yes, but that's not the last word. God forgives your sin. You won't die for it, but because of your blasphemous behavior, the son born to you will die. After Nathan went home, God afflicted the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and he came down sick. David prayed desperately to God for the little boy. He fasted, wouldn't go out, and slept on the floor. The elders in his family came in and tried to get him off the floor, but he wouldn't budge, nor could they get him to eat anything. On the seventh day, the child died. David's servants were afraid to tell him. They said, What do we do now? While the child was living, he wouldn't listen to a word we said. Now, with the child dead, if we speak to him, there's no telling what he'll do. David noticed that the servants were whispering behind his back and realized that the boy must have died. He asked the servants, Is the boy dead? Yes, they answered, He's dead. David got up from the floor, washed his face, and combed his hair, put on a fresh change of clothes, then went into the sanctuary and worshipped. Then he came home and asked for something to eat. They set it before him, and he ate. His servants asked him, What's going on with you? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept and stayed up all night. Now that he's dead, you get up and eat? While the child was alive, he said, I fasted and wept, thinking, God might have mercy on me and the child would live. But now that he's dead, why fast? Can I bring him back now? I can go to him, but he can't come to me. David went and comforted his wife Bathsheba, and when he slept with her, they conceived a son. When he was born, they named him Solomon. God had a special love for him and sent word by Nathan the prophet that God wanted him named Jedediah, God's beloved. Joab, at war in Rabbah against the Ammonites, captured the royal city. He sent messengers to David saying, I'm fighting at Rabbah, and I've just captured the city's water supply. Hurry and get the rest of the troops together and set up camp here at the city and complete the capture yourself. Otherwise, I'll capture it and get all the credit instead of you. So David marshaled all the troops, went to Rabbah, and fought and captured it. He took the crown from their king's head, very heavy with gold and with a precious stone in it. It ended up on David's head. And they plundered the city, carrying off a great quantity of loot. David emptied the city of its people and put them to slave labor using saws, picks, and axes, and making bricks. He did this to all the Ammonite cities. Then David and the whole army returned to Jerusalem. Chapter 13. Sometime later, this happened. Absalom, David's son, had a sister who was very attractive. Her name was Tamar. Amnon, also David's son, was in love with her. Amnon was obsessed with his sister Tamar to the point of making himself sick over her. She was a virgin, so he couldn't see how he could get his hands on her. Amnon had a good friend, Jonadab, the son of David's brother, Shimea. Jonadab was exceptionally streetwise. He said to Amnon, Why are you moping around like this day after day? You, the son of the king. Tell me what's eating at you. In a word, Tamar, said Amnon, my brother Absalom's sister. I'm in love with her. Here's what you do, said Jonadab. Go to bed and pretend you're sick. When your father comes to visit you, say, Have my sister Tamar come and prepare some supper for me here, where I can watch her, and she can feed me." So Amnon took to his bed and acted sick. When the king came to visit, Amnon said, "Would you do me a favor? Have my sister Tamar come and make some nourishing dumplings here, where I can watch her and be fed by her." David sent word to Tamar, who was home at the time, "Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare a meal for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house. She took dough, kneaded it, formed it into dumplings, and cooked them while he watched from his bed. But when she took the cooking pot and served him, he wouldn't eat. Amnon said, "Clear everyone out of the house." And they all cleared out. Then he said to Tamar, "Bring the food into my bedroom, where we can eat in privacy." She took the nourishing dumplings she had prepared and brought them to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she got ready to feed him, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, sister." "No, brother," she said. "Don't hurt me. This kind of thing isn't done in Israel. Don't do this terrible thing. Where could I ever show my face? And you'll be out on the street in disgrace. Oh, please, speak to the king. He'll let you marry me." But he wouldn't listen. Being much stronger than she, he raped her. No sooner had Amnon raped her than he hated her, an immense hatred. The hatred that he felt for her was greater than the love he'd had for her. "Get up," he said, "and get out." "Oh, no, brother," she said. "Please, this is an even worse evil than what you just did to me." But he wouldn't listen to her. He called for his valet. "Get rid of this woman, get her out of my sight," and lock the door after her. The valet threw her out and locked the door behind her. She was wearing a long-sleeved gown. That's how virgin princesses used to dress from early adolescence on. Tamar poured ashes on her head. Then she ripped the long-sleeved gown, held her head in her hands, and walked away, sobbing as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has your brother Amnon had his way with you? Now, my dear sister, let's keep it quiet. A family matter. He is, after all, your brother. Don't take this so hard." Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's home, bitter and desolate. King David heard the whole story and was enraged, but he didn't discipline Amnon. David doted on him because he was his firstborn. Absalom quit speaking to Amnon, not a word, whether good or bad, because he hated him for violating his sister Tamar. 2 years went by. One day, Absalom threw a sheep-shearing party in Baal-Hazor in the vicinity of Ephraim and invited all the king's sons. He also went to the king and invited him. "Look, I'm throwing a sheep-shearing party. Come and bring your servants." But the king said, "No, son, not this time, and not the whole household. We'd just be a burden to you." Absalom pushed, but David wouldn't budge. But he did give him his blessing. Then Absalom said, "Well, if you won't come, at least let my brother Amnon come." "And why," said the king, "should he go with you?" But Absalom was so insistent that he gave in and let Amnon and all the rest of the king's sons go. Absalom prepared a banquet fit for a king. Then he instructed his servants, "Look sharp now. When Amnon is well into the sauce and feeling no pain, and I give the order, strike Amnon. Kill him, and don't be afraid. I'm the one giving the command. Courage, you can do it." Absalom's servants did to Amnon exactly what their master ordered. All the king's sons got out as fast as they could, jumped on their mules, and rode off. While they were still on the road, a rumor came to the king. Absalom just killed all the king's sons. Not one is left. The king stood up, ripped his clothes to shreds, and threw himself on the floor. All his servants who were standing around at the time did the same. Just then, Jonadab, his brother Shimeah's son, stepped up. "My master must not think that all the young men, the king's sons, are dead. Only Amnon is dead. This happened because of Absalom's outrage since the day that Amnon violated his sister Tamar. So my master, the king, mustn't make things worse than they are, thinking that all your sons are dead. Only Amnon is dead." Absalom fled. Just then, the sentry on duty looked up and saw a cloud of dust on the road from Horonaim alongside the mountain. He came and told the king, "I've just seen a bunch of men on the Horonaim road coming around the mountain." Then Jonadab exclaimed to the king, "See, it's the king's sons coming, just as I said." But had no sooner said the words than the king's sons burst in, loud laments and weeping. The king joined in, along with all the servants, loud weeping, many tears. David mourned the death of his son a long time. When Absalom fled, he went to Talmai, son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. He was there 3 years. The king finally gave up trying to get back at Absalom. He had come to terms with Amnon's death. Chapter 14. Joab, son of Zeruiah, knew that the king, deep down, still cared for Absalom. So he sent to Tekoa for a wise woman who lived there and instructed her, "Pretend you are in mourning. Dress in black and don't comb your hair, so you'll look like you've been grieving over a dead loved one for a long time. Then go to the king and tell him this." Joab then told her exactly what to say. The woman of Tekoa went to the king, bowed deeply before him in homage, and said, "O king, help." He said, "How can I help?" "I'm a widow," she said. "My husband is dead. I had 2 sons. The 2 of them got into a fight out in the field, and there was no one around to step between them. The one struck the other and killed him. Then the whole family ganged up against me and demanded, 'Hand over this murderer so we can kill him for the life of the brother he murdered.' They want to wipe out the air and snuff out the one spark of life left to me. And then there would be nothing left of my husband, not so much as a name, on the face of the earth. So now I've dared come to the king, my master, about all this. They're making my life miserable, and I'm afraid. I said to myself, I'll go to the king. Maybe he'll do something. When the king hears what's going on, he'll step in and rescue me from the abuse of the man who would get rid of me and my son and God's inheritance, the works. As your handmaid, I decided ahead of time, the word of my master, the king, will be the last word in this. For my master is like an angel of God in discerning good and evil. God be with you." The king said, "Go home, and I'll take care of this for you." "I'll take all responsibility for what happens," the woman of Tekoa said. "I don't want to compromise the king and his reputation." "Bring the man who has been harassing you," the king continued. "I'll see to it that he doesn't bother you anymore." "Let the king invoke the name of God," said the woman, "so this self-styled vigilante won't ruin everything, to say nothing of killing my son." "As surely as God lives," he said, "not so much as a hair of your son's head will be lost." Then she asked, "May I say one more thing to my master, the king?" He said, "Go ahead." "Why then," the woman said, "have you done this very thing against God's people? In his verdict, the king convicts himself by not bringing home his exiled son. We all die sometime. Water spilled on the ground can't be gathered up again. But God does not take away life. He works out ways to get the exile back." The king then said, "I'm going to ask you something. Answer me truthfully." "Certainly," she said. "Let my master, the king, speak." The king said, "Is the hand of Joab mixed up in this?" "On your life, my master king, a body can't veer an inch right or left and get by with it in the royal presence." "Yes, it was your servant Joab who put me up to this, and put these very words in my mouth. It was because he wanted to turn things around that your servant Joab did this. But my master is as wise as God's angels in knowing how to handle things on this earth." The king spoke to Joab. "All right, I'll do it. Go and bring the young man, Absalom, back." Joab bowed deeply in reverence and blessed the king. "I'm reassured to know that I'm still in your good graces and have your confidence, since the king is taking the counsel of his servant." Joab got up, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. The king said, "He may return to his house, but he is not to see me face to face." So Absalom returned home, but was not permitted to see the king. This Absalom, there wasn't a man in all Israel talked about so much for his handsome good looks, and not a blemish on him from head to toe. When he cut his hair, he always cut it short in the spring because it had grown so heavy. The weight of the hair from his head was over 2 pounds. 3 sons were born to Absalom and 1 daughter. Her name was Tamar, and she was a beauty. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, And not once did he see the king face to face. He sent for Joab to get him in to see the king, but Joab still wouldn't budge. He tried a second time, and Joab still wouldn't. So he told his servants, "Listen, Joab's field adjoins mine, and he has a crop of barley in it. Go set fire to it." So Absalom's servants set fire to the field. That got him moving. Joab came to Absalom at home and said, "Why did your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom answered him, "Listen, I sent for you, saying, 'Come, and soon.' I want to send you to the king to ask, 'What's the point of my coming back from Geshur? I'd be better off still there. Let me see the king face to face. If he finds me guilty, then he can put me to death.'" Joab went to the king and told him what was going on. Absalom was then summoned. He came and bowed deeply in reverence before him, and the king kissed Absalom. Chapter 15. As time went on, Absalom took to riding in a horse-drawn chariot, with 50 men running in front of him. Early each morning, he would take up his post beside the road at the city gate. When anyone showed up with a case to bring to the king for a decision, Absalom would call him over and say, "Where do you hail from?" And the answer would come, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say, "Look, you've got a strong case, but the king isn't going to listen to you." Then he'd say, "Why doesn't someone make me a judge for this country? Anybody with a case could bring it to me, and I'd settle things fair and square." Whenever someone would treat him with special honor, he'd shrug it off and treat him like an equal, making him feel important. Absalom did this to everyone who came to do business with the king and stole the hearts of everyone in Israel. After 4 years of this, Absalom spoke to the king. "Let me go to Hebron to pay a vow that I made to God. Your servant made a vow when I was living in Geshur in Aram, saying, 'If God will bring me back to Jerusalem, I'll serve him with my life.'" The king said, "Go with my blessing," and he got up and set off for Hebron. Then Absalom sent undercover agents to all the tribes of Israel with the message, "When you hear the blast of the ram's horn trumpet, that's your signal. Shout, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men went with Absalom from Jerusalem, but they had been called together knowing nothing of the plot and made the trip innocently. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he managed also to involve Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's advisor, calling him away from his hometown of Gilo. The conspiracy grew powerful, and Absalom's supporters multiplied. Someone came to David with the report, "The whole country is taken up with Absalom." "Up and out of here," called David to all his servants who were with him in Jerusalem. "We've got to run for our lives, or none of us will escape Absalom. Hurry, he's about to pull the city down around our ears and slaughter us all." The king's servants said, "Whatever our master, the king, says, we'll do. We're with you all the way." So the king and his entire household escaped on foot. The king left 10 concubines behind to tend to the palace. And so they left step by step by step, and then paused at the last house as the whole army passed by him. All the Kerethites, all the Pelethites, and the 600 Gittites who had marched with him from Gath went past. The king called out to Ittai the Gittite, "What are you doing here? Go back with King Absalom. You're a stranger here and freshly uprooted from your own country. You arrived only yesterday, and am I going to let you take your chances with us as I live on the road like a gypsy? Go back and take your family with you, and God's grace and truth go with you." But Ittai answered, "As God lives, and my master the king lives, where my master is, that's where I'll be, whether it means life or death." "All right," said David, "go ahead." And they went on, Ittai the Gittite with all his men and all the children he had with him. The whole country was weeping in loud lament as all the people passed by. As the king crossed the brook Kidron, the army headed for the road to the wilderness. Zadok was also there, the Levites with him, carrying God's chest of the covenant. They set the chest of God down, Abiathar standing by, until all the people had evacuated the city. Then the king ordered Zadok, "Take the chest back to the city. If I get back in God's good graces, he'll bring me back and show me where the chest has been set down. But if he says, 'I'm not pleased with you,' well, he can then do with me whatever he pleases." The king directed Zadok the priest, "Here's the plan. Return to the city peacefully, with Ahimaaz your son and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, with you. I'll wait at a spot in the wilderness across the river until I get word from you telling us what's up." So Zadok and Abiathar took the chest of God back to Jerusalem and placed it there, while David went up the Mount of Olives weeping, head covered but barefooted, and the whole army was with him, heads covered and weeping as they ascended. David was told, "Ahithophel has joined the conspirators with Absalom." He prayed, "O God, turn Ahithophel's counsel to foolishness." As David approached the top of the hill where God was worshipped, Hushai the Archite, clothes ripped to shreds and dirt on his head, was there waiting for him. David said, "If you come with me, you'll be just one more piece of luggage. Go back to the city and say to Absalom, 'I'm ready to be your servant, O king. I used to be your father's servant. Now I'm your servant.' Do that, and you'll be able to confuse Ahithophel's counsel for me. The priests Zadok and Abiathar are already there. Whatever information you pick up in the palace, tell them. Their 2 sons, Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan, are there with them. Anything you pick up can be sent to me by them." Hushai, David's friend, arrived at the same time Absalom was entering Jerusalem. Chapter 16. Shortly after David passed the crest of the hill, Mephibosheth's steward Ziba met him with a string of pack animals, saddled and loaded with 100 loaves of bread, 100 raisin cakes, 100 baskets of fresh fruit, and a skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "What's all this?" "The donkeys," said Ziba, "are for the king's household to ride. The bread and fruit are for the servants to eat, and the wine is for drinking, especially for those overcome by fatigue in the wilderness." The king said, "And where is your master's grandson?" "He stayed in Jerusalem," said Ziba. He said, "This is the day Israel is going to restore my grandfather's kingdom to me." "Everything that belonged to Mephibosheth," said the king, "is now yours." Ziba said, "How can I ever thank you? I'll be forever in your debt, my master and king. May you always look on me with such kindness." When the king got to Bahurim, a man appeared who had connections with Saul's family. His name was Shimei, son of Gera. As he followed along, he shouted insults and threw rocks right and left at David and his company, servants and soldiers alike. To the accompaniment of curses, he shouted, get lost, you butcher, you hellhound. God has paid you back for all your dirty work in the family of Saul and for stealing his kingdom. God has given the kingdom to your son Absalom. Look at you now, ruined, and good riddance, you pathetic old man." Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, "This mangy dog can't insult my master the king this way. Let me go over and cut off his head." But the king said, "Why are you sons of Zeruiah always interfering and getting in the way? If he's cursing, it's because God told him, 'Curse David.' So who dares raise questions? Besides," continued David to Abishai and the rest of his servants, "my own son, my flesh and bone, is right now trying to kill me. Compared to that, this Benjaminite is small potatoes. Don't bother with him. Let him curse. He's preaching God's word to me. And who knows, maybe God will see the trouble I'm in today and exchange the curses for something good." David and his men went on down the road, while Shimei followed along on the ridge of the hill alongside, cursing, throwing stones down on them, and kicking up dirt. By the time they reached the Jordan River, David and all the men of the company were exhausted. There, they rested and were revived. By this time, Absalom and all his men were in Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with them. Soon after, Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came and greeted Absalom. "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this the way you show devotion to your good friend? Why didn't you go with your friend David?" "Because," said Hushai, "I want to be with the person that God and this people and all Israel have chosen, and I want to stay with him. Besides, who is there to serve other than the Son? Just as I served your father, I'm now ready to serve you." Then Absalom spoke to Ahithophel. "Are you ready to give counsel? What do we do next?" Ahithophel told Absalom, Go and sleep with your father's concubines, the ones he left to tend to the palace. Everyone will hear that you have openly disgraced your father, and the morale of everyone on your side will be strengthened." So Absalom pitched a tent up on the roof in public view and went in and slept with his father's concubines. The counsel that Ahithophel gave in those days was treated as if God himself had spoken. That was the reputation of Ahithophel's counsel to David. It was the same with Absalom. Chapter 17. Next, Ahithophel advised Absalom, "Let me handpick 12,000 men and go after David tonight. I'll come on him when he's bone tired and take him by complete surprise. The whole army will run off and I'll kill only David. Then I'll bring the army back to you, a bride brought back to her husband. You're only after one man after all. Then everyone will be together in peace." Absalom thought it was an excellent strategy, and all the elders of Israel agreed. But then Absalom said, "Call in Hushai the Archite. Let's hear what he has to say." So Hushai came, and Absalom put it to him. "This is what Ahithophel advised. Should we do it? What do you say?" Hushai said, "The counsel that Ahithophel has given in this instance is not good. You know your father and his men, brave and bitterly angry, like a bear robbed of her cubs. And your father is an experienced fighter. You can be sure he won't be caught napping at a time like this. Even while we're talking, he's probably holed up in some cave or other. If he jumps your men from ambush, word will soon get back, a slaughter of Absalom's army. Even if your men are valiant with hearts of lions, they'll fall apart at such news, for everyone in Israel knows the kind of fighting stuff your father's made of, and also the men with him. Here's what I'd advise. Muster the whole country, from Dan to Beersheba, an army like the sand of the sea, and you personally lead them. We'll smoke him out wherever he is, fall on him like dew falls on the earth, and believe me, there won't be a single survivor. If he hides out in a city, then the whole army will bring ropes to that city and pull it down and into a gully, not so much as a pebble left of it." Absalom and all his company agreed that the counsel of Hushai the Archite was better than the counsel of Ahithophel. God had determined to discredit the counsel of Ahithophel so as to bring ruin on Absalom. Then Hushai told the priests Zadok and Abiathar, "Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel thus and thus, and I advised them thus and thus. Now, send this message as quickly as possible to David. Don't spend the night on this side of the river. Cross immediately, or the king and everyone with him will be swallowed up alive." Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting around at Enrogel. A servant girl would come and give them messages, and then they would go and tell King David, for it wasn't safe to be seen coming into the city. But a soldier spotted them and told Absalom, so the two of them got out of there fast and went to a man's house in Bahurim. He had a well in his yard, and they climbed into it. The wife took a rug and covered the well, then spread grain on it so no one would notice anything out of the ordinary. Shortly, Absalom's servants came to the woman's house and asked her, "Have you seen Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" The woman said, "They were headed toward the river." They looked, but didn't find them, and then went back to Jerusalem. When the coast was clear, Ahimaaz and Jonathan climbed out of the well and went on to make their report to King David. "Get up and cross the river quickly. Ahithophel has given counsel against you." David and his whole army were soon up and moving and crossed the Jordan. As morning broke, there was not a single person who had not made it across the Jordan. When Ahithophel realized that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and left for his hometown. After making out his will and putting his house in order, he hanged himself and died. He was buried in the family tomb. About the time David arrived at Mahanaim, Absalom crossed the Jordan, and the whole army of Israel with him. Absalom had made Amasa head of the army, replacing Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, an Ishmaelite who had married Abigail, daughter of Nahash, and sister of Zeruiah, the mother of Joab. Israel and Absalom set camp in Gilead. When David arrived at Mahanaim, Shobai, son of Nahash, from Ammonite Rabbah, and Maker, son of Amiel of Lo-Debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds and blankets, bowls and jugs filled with wheat, barley, flour, roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds and cheese from the flocks and herds. They presented all this to David and his army to eat, because, they said, the army must be starved and exhausted and thirsty out in this wilderness. Chapter 18. David organized his forces. He appointed captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. Then David deployed his troops, a third under Joab, a third under Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third under Ittai, the Gittite. The king then announced, "I'm marching with you." They said, "No, you mustn't march with us. If we're forced to retreat, the enemy won't give it a second thought. And if half of us die, they won't do so either. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It will be better for us if you stay in the city and help from there." "If you say so," said the king, "I'll do what you think is best." And so he stood beside the city gate as the whole army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. Then the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, "Deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom." The whole army heard what the king commanded the three captains regarding Absalom. The army took the field to meet Israel. It turned out that the battle was joined in the forest of Ephraim. The army of Israel was beaten badly there that day by David's men, a terrific slaughter, 20,000 men. There was fighting helter-skelter all over the place. The forest claimed more lives that day than the sword. Absalom ran into David's men, but was out in front of them riding his mule when the mule ran under the branches of a huge oak tree. Absalom's head was caught in the oak, and he was left dangling between heaven and earth, the mule running right out from under him. A solitary soldier saw him and reported to Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging from an oak tree." Joab said to the man who told him, "If you saw him, why didn't you kill him then and there? I'd have rewarded you with 10 pieces of silver and a fancy belt." The man told Joab, "Even if I'd had a chance at 1,000 pieces of silver, I wouldn't have laid a hand on the king's son. We all heard the king command you and Abishai and Ittai, 'For my sake, protect the young man Absalom.' Why, I'd be risking my life, for nothing is hidden from the king, and you would have just stood there." Joab said, "I can't waste my time with you." He then grabbed 3 knives and stabbed Absalom in the heart while he was still alive in the tree. By then, Absalom was surrounded by 10 of Joab's armor-bearers. They hacked away at him and killed him. Joab then blew the ram's horn trumpet, calling off the army in its pursuit of Israel. They took Absalom, dumped him into a huge pit in the forest, and piled an immense mound of rocks over him. Meanwhile, the whole army of Israel was in flight, each man making his own way home. While alive, Absalom had erected for himself a pillar in the valley of the king, because, he said, "I have no son to carry on my name." He inscribed the pillar with his own name. To this day, it is called the Absalom Memorial. Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, said, "Let me run to the king and bring him the good news that God has delivered him from his enemies." But Joab said, "You're not the one to deliver the good news today. Some other day, maybe, but it's not good news today." This was because the king's son was dead. Then Joab ordered a Cushite, "You go, tell the king what you've seen." "Yes, sir," said the Cushite, and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, kept at it, begging Joab, "What does it matter? Let me run too, following the Cushite." Joab said, "Why all this run? You'll get no thanks for it, I can tell you." "I don't care. Let me run." "Okay," said Joab, "run." So Ahimaaz ran, taking the lower valley road, and passed the Cushite. David was sitting between the 2 gates. The sentry had gone up to the top of the gate, on the wall, and looked around. He saw a solitary runner. The sentry called down and told the king. The king said, "If he's alone, it must be good news." As the runner came closer, the sentry saw another runner and called down to the gate. "Another runner all by himself." And the king said, "This also must be good news." Then the sentry said, "I can see the first man now. He runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok." "He's a good man," said the king. "He's bringing good news for sure." Then Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, "Peace." Then he bowed deeply before the king, his face to the ground. Blessed be your God. He has handed over the men who rebelled against my master, the king." The king asked, "But is the young man Absalom all right?" Ahimaaz said, "I saw a huge ruckus just as Joab was sending me off, but I don't know what it was about." The king said, "Step aside and stand over there." So he stepped aside. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "Good news, my master and king. God has given victory today over all those who rebelled against you." "But," said the king, "is the young man Absalom all right?" And the Cushite replied, "Would that all the enemies of my master the king and all who maliciously rose against you end up like that young man." The king was stunned. Heartbroken, he went up to the room over the gate and wept. As he wept, he cried out, "Oh, my son Absalom, my dear, dear son Absalom! Why not me rather than you, my death and not yours? Oh, Absalom, my dear, dear son." Chapter 19. David's grief for Absalom. Joab was told that David was weeping and lamenting over Absalom. The day's victory turned into a day of mourning as word passed through the army. David is grieving over his son. The army straggled back to the city that day demoralized, dragging their tails. And the king held his face in his hands and lamented loudly, "Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my dear, dear son." But in private, Joab rebuked the king. "Now you've done it, knocked the wind out of your loyal servants who have just saved your life, to say nothing of the lives of your sons and daughters, wives and concubines. What is this, loving those who hate you and hating those who love you? Your actions give a clear message. Officers and soldiers mean nothing to you. You know that if Absalom were alive right now, we'd all be dead. Would that make you happy? Get hold of yourself. Get out there and put some heart into your servants. I swear to God that if you don't go to them, they'll desert. Not a soldier will be left here by nightfall, and that will be the worst thing that has happened yet." So the king came out and took his place at the city gate. Soon, everyone knew, "Oh, look, the king has come out to receive us." And his whole army came and presented itself to the king. But the Israelites had fled the field of battle and gone home. Meanwhile, the whole populace was now complaining to its leaders. "Wasn't it the king who saved us time and again from our enemies and rescued us from the Philistines? And now he has had to flee the country on account of Absalom? And now this Absalom, whom we made king, is dead in battle. So what are you waiting for? Why don't you bring the king back?" When David heard what was being said, he sent word to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. "Ask the elders of Judah, why are you so laggard in bringing the king back home? You are my brothers. You're my own flesh and blood. So why are you the last ones to bring the king back home? And tell Amasa, you too are my flesh and blood, as God is my witness. I'm making you the permanent commander of the army in place of Joab." He captured the hearts of everyone in Judah. They were unanimous in sending for the king. "Come back, you and all your servants." So the king returned. He arrived at the Jordan just as Judah reached Gilgal, on their way to welcome the king and escort him across the Jordan. Even Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried down to join the men of Judah so he could welcome the king, 1,000 Benjaminites with him. And Ziba, Saul's steward, with his 15 sons and 20 servants, waded across the Jordan to meet the king and brought his entourage across, doing whatever they could to make the king comfortable. Shimei, son of Gera, bowed deeply in homage to the king as soon as he was across the Jordan and said, "Don't think badly of me, my master. Overlook my irresponsible outburst on the day my master the king left Jerusalem. Don't hold it against me. I know I sinned, but look at me now, the first of all the tribe of Joseph to come down and welcome back my master the king." Abishai, son of Zeruiah, interrupted. "Enough of this. Shouldn't we kill him outright? Why, he cursed God's anointed." But David said, "What is it with you sons of Zeruiah? Why do you insist on being so contentious? Nobody is going to be killed today. I am again king over Israel." Then the king turned to Shimei. "You're not going to die." And the king gave him his word. Next, Mephibosheth, grandson of Saul, arrived from Jerusalem to welcome the king. He hadn't combed his hair or trimmed his beard or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safe and sound. The king said, "And why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth?" "My master, the king," he said, "my servant betrayed me. I told him to saddle my donkey so I could ride it and go with the king, for, as you know, I am lame. And then he lied to you about me. But my master the king has been like one of God's angels. He knew what was right and did it. Wasn't everyone in my father's house doomed? But you took me in and gave me a place at your table. What more could I ever expect or ask?" "That's enough," said the king. "Say no more. Here's my decision. You and Ziba divide the property between you." Mephibosheth said, "Oh, let him have it all. All I care about is that my master the king is home, safe and sound." Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim. He crossed the Jordan with the king to give him a good send-off. Barzillai was a very old man, 80 years old. He had supplied the king's needs all the while he was in Mahanaim, since he was very wealthy. "Join me in Jerusalem," the king said to Barzillai. "Let me take care of you." But Barzillai declined the offer. "How long do you think I'd live if I went with the king to Jerusalem? I'm 80 years old and not much good anymore to anyone. Can't taste food, can't hear music. So why add to the burdens of my master the king? I'll just go a little way across the Jordan with the king. But why would the king need to make a great thing of that? Let me go back and die in my hometown and be buried with my father and mother. But my servant Kimham here, let him go with you in my place, but treat him well." The king said, "That's settled. Kimham goes with me, and I will treat him well. If you think of anything else, I'll do that for you too." The army crossed the Jordan, but the king stayed. The king kissed and blessed Barzillai, who then returned home. Then the king, Kimham with him, crossed over at Gilgal. The whole army of Judah and half the army of Israel processed with the king. The men of Israel came to the king and said, "Why have our brothers, the men of Judah, taken over as if they owned the king, escorting the king and his family and close associates across the Jordan?" The men of Judah retorted, "Because the king is related to us, that's why. But why make a scene? You don't see us getting treated special because of it, do you?" The men of Israel shot back, "We have 10 shares in the king to your 1. Besides, we're the firstborn, so why are we having to play second fiddle? It was our idea to bring him back." But the men of Judah took a harder line than the men of Israel. Chapter 20. Just then, a good-for-nothing named Sheba, son of Bichri the Benjaminite, blew a blast on the ram's horn trumpet, calling out, "We've got nothing to do with David. There's no future for us with the son of Jesse. Let's get out of here, Israel. Head for your tents." So all the men of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, son of Bichri. But the men of Judah stayed committed, sticking with their king all the way from the Jordan to Jerusalem. When David arrived home in Jerusalem, the king took the 10 concubines he had left to watch the palace and placed them in seclusion, under guard. He provided for their needs, but didn't visit them. They were virtual prisoners until they died, widows as long as they lived. The king ordered Amasa, "Muster the men of Judah for me in 3 days, then report in." Amasa went to carry out his orders, but he was late reporting back. So David told Abishai, "Sheba, son of Bichri, is going to hurt us even worse than Absalom did. Take your master's servants and hunt him down before he gets holed up in some fortress city where we can't get to him." So under Abishai's command, all the best men, Joab's men and the Kerethites and Pelethites, left Jerusalem to hunt down Sheba, son of Bichri. They were near the boulder at Gibeon when Amasa came their way. Joab was wearing a tunic with a sheathed sword strapped on his waist, but the sword slipped out and fell to the ground. Joab greeted Amasa, "How are you, brother?" and took Amasa's beard in his right hand as if to kiss him. Amasa didn't notice the sword in Joab's other hand. Joab stuck him in the belly and his guts spilled to the ground. A second blow wasn't needed. He was dead. Then Joab and his brother Abishai continued to chase Sheba, son of Bichri. One of Joab's soldiers took up his post over the body and called out, "Everyone who sides with Joab and supports David, follow Joab." Amasa was lying in a pool of blood in the middle of the road. The man realized that the whole army was going to stop and take a look, so he pulled Amasa's corpse off the road into the field and threw a blanket over him so he wouldn't collect spectators. As soon as he'd gotten him off the road, the traffic flowed normally, following Joab in the chase after Sheba, son of Bichri. Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel as far as Abel-Beth-Maacah. All the Bichrites clustered and followed him into the city. Joab's army arrived and laid siege to Sheba in Abel-Beth-Maacah. They built a siege ramp up against the city's fortification. The plan was to knock down the wall. But a shrewd woman called out from the city, "Listen, everybody, please tell Joab to come close so I can talk to him." When he had come, the woman said, "Are you Joab?" He said, "I am." Then she said, "Listen to what I have to say." He said, "I'm listening." There's an old saying in these parts, "If it's answers you want, come to Abel and get it straight. We're a peaceful people here and reliable. And here you are, trying to tear down one of Israel's mother cities. Why would you want to mess with God's legacy like that?" Joab protested. "Believe me, you've got it all wrong. I'm not here to hurt anyone or destroy anything, not on your life, but a man from the hill country of Ephraim, Sheba, son of Bichri by name, revolted against King David. Hand him over, him only, and we'll get out of here." The woman told Joab, "Sounds good. His head will be tossed to you from the wall." The woman presented her strategy to the whole city, and they did it. They cut off the head of Sheba, son of Bichri, and tossed it down to Joab. He then blew a blast on the ram's horn trumpet, and the soldiers all went home. Joab returned to the king in Jerusalem. Joab was again commander of the whole army of Israel. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kiriathites and Pelethites. Adoniram over the work crews. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was clerk. Sheva was historian. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Ira, the Jairite, was David's chaplain. Chapter 21. Famine and War. There was a famine in David's time. It went on year after year after year, 3 years. David went to God seeking the reason. God said, "This is because there is blood on Saul and his house from the time he massacred the Gibeonites." So the king called the Gibeonites together for consultation. The Gibeonites were not part of Israel. They were what was left of the Amorites and protected by a treaty with Israel. But Saul, a fanatic for the honor of Israel and Judah, tried to kill them off. David addressed the Gibeonites. "What can I do for you? How can I compensate you so that you will bless God's legacy of land and people?" The Gibeonites replied, "We don't want any money from Saul and his family, and it's not up to us to put anyone in Israel to death." But David persisted. "What are you saying I should do for you?" Then they told the king, "The man who tried to get rid of us, who schemed to wipe us off the map of Israel. Well, let 7 of his sons be handed over to us to be executed, hanged before God at Gibeah of Saul, the holy mountain." And David agreed, "I'll hand them over to you." The king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the promise David and Jonathan had spoken before God. But the king selected Armoni and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons that Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, had borne to Saul, plus the 5 sons that Saul's daughter, Merab, had borne to Adriel, son of Barzillai the Meholathite. He turned them over to the Gibeonites, who hanged them on the mountain before God. All 7 died together. Harvest was just getting underway, the beginning of the barley harvest, when they were executed. Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, took rough burlap and spread it out for herself on a rock from the beginning of the harvest until the heavy rain started. She kept the birds away from the bodies by day and the wild animals by night. David was told what she had done, this Rizpah, daughter of Aiah and concubine of Saul. He then went and got the remains of Saul and Jonathan, his son, from the leaders at Jabesh Gilead, who had rescued them from the town square at Beth-shan, where the Philistines had hung them after striking them down at Gilboa. He gathered up their remains and brought them together with the dead bodies of the 7 who had just been hanged. The bodies were taken back to the land of Benjamin and given a decent burial in the tomb of Kish, Saul's father. They did everything the king ordered to be done. That cleared things up. From then on, God responded to Israel's prayers for the land. War broke out again between the Philistines and Israel. David and his men went down to fight. David became exhausted. Ishbi-Benob, a warrior descended from Rapha, with a spear weighing nearly 8 pounds and outfitted in brand new armor, announced that he'd kill David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to the rescue, struck the Philistine, and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, "No more fighting on the front lines for you. Don't snuff out the lamp of Israel." Later, there was another skirmish with the Philistines at Gob. That time, Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, another of the warriors descended from Rapha. At yet another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair, the weaver of Bethlehem, killed Goliath the Gittite, whose spear was as big as a flagpole. Still another fight broke out in Gath. There was a giant there with 6 fingers on his hands and 6 toes on his feet, 24 fingers and toes. He was another of those descended from Rapha. He insulted Israel, and Jonathan, son of Shimeah, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were descended from Rapha and Gath, and they all were killed by David and his soldiers. Chapter 22. David prayed to God the words of this song after God saved him from all his enemies and from Saul. God is bedrock under my feet, the castle in which I live, my rescuing knight. My God, the high crag where I run for dear life, hiding behind the boulders, safe in the granite hideout. My mountaintop refuge, he saves me from ruthless men. I sing to God the praise lofty and find myself safe and saved. The waves of death crashed over me, devil waters rushed over me. Hell's ropes cinched me tight, death traps barred every exit. A hostile world. I called to God, to my God I cried out. From his palace he heard me call. My cry brought me right into his presence. A private audience. Earth wobbled and lurched. The very heavens shook like leaves, quaked like aspen leaves because of his rage. His nostrils flared, billowing smoke. His mouth spit fire. Tongues of fire darted in and out. He lowered the sky. He stepped down. Under his feet, an abyss opened up. He rode a winged creature, swift on wind wings. He wrapped himself in a trench coat of black rain cloud darkness. But his cloud brightness burst through, a grand comet of fireworks. Then God thundered out of heaven. The high God gave a great shout. God shot his arrows, pandemonium. He hurled his lightnings, a rout. The secret sources of ocean were exposed. The hidden depths of earth lay uncovered. The moment God roared in protest, let loose his hurricane anger. But me he caught, reached all the way from sky to sea. He pulled me out of that ocean of hate, that enemy chaos, the void in which I was drowning. They hit me when I was down, but God stuck by me. He stood me up on a wide open field. I stood there, saved, surprised to be loved. God made my life complete when I placed all the pieces before him. When I cleaned up my act, he gave me a fresh start. Indeed, I've kept alert to God's ways. I haven't taken God for granted. Every day I review the ways he works. I try not to miss a trick. I feel put back together, and I'm watching my step. God rewrote the text of my life when I opened the book of my heart to his eyes. You stick by people who stick with you. You're straight with people who are straight with you. You're good to good people. You shrewdly work around the bad ones. You take the side of the down and out, but the stuck up, you take down a peg. Suddenly, God, your light floods my path. God drives out the darkness. I smash the bands of marauders. I vault the high fences. What a God! His road stretches straight and smooth. Every God direction is road tested. Everyone who runs toward him makes it. Is there any God like God? Are we not at bedrock? Is not this the God who armed me well, then aimed me in the right direction? Now I run like a deer. I'm king of the mountain. He shows me how to fight. I can bend a bronze bow. You protect me with salvation armor. You touch me, and I feel 10 feet tall. You cleared the ground under me, so my footing was firm. When I chased my enemies, I caught them. I didn't let go till they were dead men. I nailed them. They were down for good. Then I walked all over them. You armed me well for this fight. You smashed the upstarts. You made my enemies turn tail, and I wiped out the haters. They cried, "Uncle," but Uncle didn't come. They yelled for God and got no for an answer. I ground them to dust. They gusted in the wind. I threw them out like garbage in the gutter. You rescued me from a squabbling people. You made me a leader of nations. People I'd never heard of served me. The moment they got wind of me, they submitted. They gave up. They came trembling from their hideouts. Live, God, blessing to my rock, my towering salvation God. This God set things right for me and shut up the people who talk back. He rescued me from enemy anger. You pulled me from the grip of upstarts. You saved me from the bullies. That's why I'm thanking you, God, all over the world. That's why I'm singing songs that rhyme your name. God's king takes the trophy. God's chosen is beloved. I mean David and all his children. Always. Chapter 23. These are David's last words. The voice of the son of Jesse, the voice of the man God took to the top, whom the God of Jacob made king and Israel's most popular singer. God's Spirit spoke through me. His words took shape on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke to me. Israel's rock mountain said, "Whoever governs fairly and well, who rules in the fear of God, is like first light at daybreak, without a cloud in the sky, like green grass carpeting earth, glistening under fresh rain." And this is just how my regime has been. For God guaranteed his covenant with me, spelled it out plainly, and kept every promised word, my entire salvation, my every desire. But the devil's henchmen are like thorns, culled and piled as trash. Better not try to touch them. Keep your distance with a rake or hoe. They'll make a glorious bonfire. This is the listing of David's top men. Josheb-Basshebeth, the Tachamonite. He was chief of the three. He once put his spear to work against 800, killed them all in a day. Eleazar, son of Dodai the Ahohite, was the next of the elite three. He was with David when the Philistines poked fun at them at Pas Dammim. When the Philistines drew up for battle, Israel retreated, but Eleazar stood his ground and killed Philistines right and left until he was exhausted. But he never let go of his sword. A big win for God that day. The army then rejoined Eleazar, but all there was left to do was the cleanup. Shema, son of Iji, the Hararite, was the third of the three. The Philistines had mustered for battle at Lehi, where there was a field full of lentils. Israel fled before the Philistines, but Shema took his stand at the center of the field, successfully defended it, and routed the Philistines. Another great victory for God. One day during harvest, the three parted from the 30 and joined David at the cave of Adullam. A squad of Philistines had set up camp in the valley of Rephaim. While David was holed up in the cave, the Philistines had their base camp in Bethlehem. David had a sudden craving and said, "Would I ever like a drink of water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem?" So the three penetrated the Philistine lines, drew water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem, and brought it back to David. But David wouldn't drink it. He poured it out as an offering to God, saying, "There's no way, God, that I'll drink this. This isn't mere water. It's their lifeblood. They risked their very lives to bring it." So David refused to drink it. This is the sort of thing that the three did. Abishai, brother of Joab and son of Zeruiah, was the head of the 30. He once got credit for killing 300 with his spear, but he was never named in the same breath as the three. He was the most respected of the 30 and was their captain, but never got included among the three. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada from Kabzeel, was a vigorous man who accomplished a great deal. He once killed 2 lion cubs in Moab. Another time, on a snowy day, he climbed down into a pit and killed a lion. Another time, he killed a formidable Egyptian. The Egyptian was armed with a spear, and Benaiah went against him with nothing but a walking stick. He seized the spear from his grip and killed him with his own spear. These are the things that Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, is famous for. But neither did he ever get ranked with the 3. He was held in greatest respect among the 30, but he never got included with the 3. David put him in charge of his bodyguard. The 30. The 30 consisted of Asahel, brother of Joab; Elhanan, son of Doda of Bethlehem; Shema, the Harodite; Elika, the Harodite; Helez, the Paltite; Ira, son of Ikesh, the Tekoite; Abiezer, the Anathothite; Sibbecai, the Hushathite; Zalmon, the Ahohite; Maharai, the Netophathite; Heled, son of Baanah, the Netophathite; Ithai, son of Ribai, from Gibeah of the Benjaminites; Benaiah, the Pirathonite; Hiddai, from the Badlands of Gaash; Abi-Albon, the Arbathite; Asmaveth, the Barhumite; Eliabah, the Shaalbonite; Jashan, the Gizonite; Jonathan, son of Shammah, the Hararite; Ahiam, son of Sherar, the Urite; Eliphalet, son of Ahasbai, the Maacathite; Eliam, son of Ahithophel, the Gilonite; Hezro, the Carmelite; Perai, the Arbite; Igal, son of Nathan, commander of the army of Hagrites; Zelek, the Ammonite; Naharai, the Beerothite, weapon-bearer of Joab, son of Zeruiah; Ira, the Ithrite; Gareb, the Ithrite; Uriah, the Hittite. 37, all told. Chapter 24. Once again, God's anger blazed out against Israel. He tested David by telling him, "Go and take a census of Israel and Judah." So David gave orders to Joab and the army officers under him. "Canvass all the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and get a count of the population. I want to know the number." But Joab resisted the king. "May your God multiply people by the hundreds right before the eyes of my master the king, but why on earth would you do a thing like this?" Nevertheless, the king insisted, and so Joab and the army officers left the king to take a census of Israel. They crossed the Jordan and began with Aroer in the town in the canyon of the Gadites near Jazer, proceeded through Gilead, past Hermon, then on to Dan, but detoured Sidon. They covered Fort Tyr and all the Hivite and Canaanite cities, and finally reached the Negev of Judah at Beersheba. They canvassed the whole country, and after 9 months and 20 days, arrived back in Jerusalem. Joab gave the results of the census to the king. 800,000 able-bodied fighting men in Israel. In Judah, 500,000. But when it was all done, David was overwhelmed with guilt because he had counted the people, replacing trust with statistics. And David prayed to God, "I have sinned badly in what I have just done, but now, God, forgive my guilt. I've been really stupid." When David got up the next morning, the word of God had already come to Gad the prophet, David's spiritual advisor. "Go and give David this message. God has spoken thus. There are 3 things I can do to you. Choose one out of the 3, and I'll see that it's done." Gad came to deliver the message. "Do you want 3 years of famine in the land, or 3 months of running from your enemies while they chase you down, or 3 days of an epidemic on the country? Think it over and make up your mind. What shall I tell the one who sent me?" David told Gad, "They're all terrible, but I'd rather be punished by God, whose mercy is great, than fall into human hands." So God let loose an epidemic from morning until supper time. From Dan to Beersheba, 70,000 people died. But when the angel reached out over Jerusalem to destroy it, God felt the pain of the terror and told the angel who was spreading death among the people, "Enough's enough. Pull back." The angel of God had just reached the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. David looked up and saw the angel hovering between earth and sky, sword drawn and about to strike Jerusalem. David and the elders bowed in prayer and covered themselves with rough burlap. When David saw the angel about to destroy the people, he prayed, Please, I'm the one who sinned. I, the shepherd, did the wrong. But these sheep, what did they do wrong? Punish me and my family, not them." That same day, Gad came to David and said, "Go and build an altar on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite." David did what Gad told him, what God commanded. Araunah looked up and saw David and his men coming his way. He met them, bowing deeply, honoring the king and saying, "Why has my master the king come to see me?" "To buy your threshing floor," said David, "so I can build an altar to God here and put an end to this disaster." "Oh," said Araunah, "let my master the king take and sacrifice whatever he wants. Look, here's an ox for the burnt offering, and threshing paddles, and ox yokes for fuel." Araunah gives it all to the king, and may God, your God, act in your favor. But the king said to Araunah, "No, I've got to buy it from you for a good price. I'm not going to offer God, my God, sacrifices that are no sacrifice." So David bought the threshing floor and the ox, paying out 50 shekels of silver. He built an altar to God there and sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings. God was moved by the prayers, and that was the end of the disaster. 1 Kings, chapter 1. David. King David grew old. The years had caught up with him. Even though they piled blankets on him, he couldn't keep warm. So his servants said to him, "We're going to get a young virgin for our master, the king, to be at his side and look after him. She'll get in bed with you and arouse our master, the king." So they searched the country of Israel for the most ravishing girl they could find. They found Abishag the Shunammite and brought her to the king. The girl was stunningly beautiful. She stayed at his side and looked after the king, but the king did not have sex with her. At this time, Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, puffed himself up, saying, "I'm the next king." He made quite a splash, with chariots and riders and 50 men to run ahead of him. His father had spoiled him rotten as a child, never once reprimanding him. Besides that, he was very good-looking, and the next in line after Absalom. Adonijah talked with Joab, son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they threw their weight on his side. But neither the priest Zadok, nor Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, nor Nathan the prophet, nor Shimei and Rei, nor David's personal bodyguards supported Adonijah. Next, Adonijah held a coronation feast, sacrificing sheep, cattle, and grain-fed heifers at the stone of Zaholath, near the Rogel spring. He invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and everyone in Judah who had position and influence. But he did not invite the prophet Nathan, Benaiah, the bodyguards, or his brother Solomon. Nathan went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. "Did you know that Adonijah, Haggith's son, has taken over as king, and our master David doesn't know a thing about it? Quickly now, let me tell you how you can save both your own life and Solomon's. Go immediately to King David. Speak up. Didn't you, my master the king, promise me your son Solomon will be king after me and sit on my throne? So why is Adonijah now king? While you're there talking with the king, I'll come in and corroborate your story." Bathsheba went at once to the king in his palace bedroom. He was so old. Abishag was at his side, making him comfortable. As Bathsheba bowed low, honoring the king, he said, "What do you want?" "My master," she said, "you promised me in God's name, your son Solomon will be king after me and sit on my throne. And now look what's happened. Adonijah has taken over as king, and my master, the king, doesn't even know it. He has thrown a huge coronation feast, cattle and grain-fed heifers and sheep, inviting all the king's sons, the priest Abiathar and Joab, head of the army. But your servant Solomon was not invited. My master, the king, every eye in Israel is watching you to see what you'll do, to see who will sit on the throne of my master, the king, after him. If you fail to act, the moment you're buried, my son Solomon and I are as good as dead." Abruptly, while she was telling the king all this, Nathan the prophet came in and was announced. "Nathan the prophet is here." He came before the king, honoring him by bowing deeply, his face touching the ground. "My master, the king," Nathan began, Did you say, Adonijah shall be king after me and sit on my throne? Because that's what's happening. He's thrown a huge coronation feast. Cattle, grain-fed heifers, sheep, inviting all the king's sons, the army officers, and Abiathar the priest. They're having a grand time, eating and drinking and shouting, "Long live King Adonijah!" But I wasn't invited, nor was the priest Zadok, nor Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, nor your servant Solomon. Is this something that my master the king has done behind our backs, not telling your servants who you intended to be king after you? King David took action. "Get Bathsheba back in here." She entered and stood before the king. The king solemnly promised, "As God lives, the God who delivered me from every kind of trouble, I'll do exactly what I promised in God's name, the God of Israel. Your son Solomon will be king after me and take my place on the throne, and I'll make sure it happens this very day." Bathsheba bowed low, her face to the ground. Kneeling in reverence before the king, she said, "Oh, may my master King David live forever." King David said, "Call Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah, son of Jehoiada." They came to the king. Then he ordered, "Gather my servants, then mount my son Solomon on my royal mule, and lead him in procession down to Gihon. When you get there, Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet will anoint him king over Israel. Then blow the ram's horn trumpet and shout, 'Long live King Solomon.' You will then accompany him as he enters and takes his place on my throne, succeeding me as king. I have named him ruler over Israel and Judah." Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, backed the king. "Yes, and may God, the God of my master the king, confirm it, just as God has been with my master the king. May he also be with Solomon, and make his rule even greater than that of my master King David." Then Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and the king's personal bodyguard, the Kerethites and Pelethites, went down, mounted Solomon on King David's mule, and paraded with him to Gihon. Zadok the priest brought a flask of oil from the sanctuary and anointed Solomon. They blew the ram's horn trumpet, and everyone shouted, "Long live King Solomon!" Everyone joined the fanfare, the band playing and the people singing, the very earth reverberating to the sound. Adonijah and his retinue of guests were just finishing their coronation feast when they heard it. When Joab heard the blast of the ram's horn trumpet, he said, "What's going on here? What's all this uproar?" Suddenly, in the midst of the questioning, Jonathan, son of Abiathar the priest, showed up. Adonijah said, "Welcome, a brave and good man like you must have good news." But Jonathan answered, "Hardly. Our master, King David, has just made Solomon king, and the king has surrounded him with Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, with the Kerethites and Pelethites, and they've mounted Solomon on the royal mule. Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet have anointed him king at Gihon, and the parade is headed up this way, singing. A great fanfare. The city is rocking. That's what you're hearing. Here's the crowning touch. Solomon is seated on the throne of the kingdom. And that's not all. The king's servants have come to give their blessing to our master, King David, saying, 'God make Solomon's name even more honored than yours, and make his rule greater than yours.' On his deathbed, the king worshipped God and prayed, 'Blessed be God, Israel's God, who has provided a successor to my throne, and I've lived to see it.' Panicked, Adonijah's guests got out of there, scattering every which way. But Adonijah himself, afraid for his life because of Solomon, fled to the sanctuary and grabbed the horns of the altar. Solomon was told, 'Adonijah, fearful of King Solomon, has taken sanctuary and seized the horns of the altar and is saying, I'm not leaving until King Solomon promises that he won't kill me.' Solomon then said, 'If he proves to be a man of honor, not a hair of his head will be hurt. But if there is evil in him, he'll die.' Solomon summoned him, and they brought him from the altar. Adonijah came and bowed down, honoring the king. Solomon dismissed him. Go home. Chapter 2. When David's time to die approached, he charged his son Solomon, saying, I'm about to go the way of all the earth. But you, be strong. Show what you're made of. Do what God tells you. Walk in the paths He shows you. Follow the life map absolutely. Keep an eye out for the signposts, His course for life set out in the revelation to Moses. Then you'll get on well in whatever you do and wherever you go. Then God will confirm what He promised me when He said, if your sons watch their step, staying true to me, heart and soul, you'll always have a successor on Israel's throne. And don't forget what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to the 2 commanders of Israel's army, to Abner, son of Ner, and to Amasa, son of Jether. He murdered them in cold blood, acting in peacetime as if he were at war, and has been stained with that blood ever since. Do what you think best with him, but by no means let him get off scot-free. Make him pay. But be generous to the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite. Extend every hospitality to them. That's the way they treated me when I was running for my life from Absalom, your brother. You also will have to deal with Shimei, son of Gera the Benjaminite from Bahurim, the one who cursed me so viciously when I was on my way to Mahanaim. Later, when he welcomed me back at the Jordan, I promised him under God, I won't put you to death. But neither should you treat him as if nothing ever happened. You're wise. You know how to handle these things. You'll know what to do to make him pay before he dies. Then David joined his ancestors. He was buried in the city of David. David ruled Israel for 40 years, 7 years in Hebron and another 33 in Jerusalem. Solomon took over on the throne of his father David. He had a firm grip on the kingdom.